The first time Mara hears Elena Cross's name, it's whispered, not spoken, by a man bleeding out on a motel carpet. Tell Cross, she missed one. By the time sirens arrive, the man is dead. And Mara knows one thing for certain. The message wasn't meant for the police. It was meant for her. Before we continue, take a moment. If stories about hidden systems, moral gray zones, and the cost of truth matter to you, if you believe some cases deserve to be remembered even when they're buried, then consider subscribing to Midnight Casefiles. New stories arrive regularly, each exploring what happens when silence becomes policy and when someone finally refuses to look away. Stay with us. Some stories don't end when the case is closed. The motel sign flickered like it was running out of patience. Half the letters were dead, the other half buzzing weakly against the night. Red light spilled across the wet asphalt, bleeding into puddles left behind by a storm that had already moved on. Mara slowed her car as she passed, not because she planned to stop, but because something in her chest tightened in that quiet, familiar way she had learned to trust. She didn't believe in instincts. She believed in patterns her body recognized before her mind caught up. The parking lot was nearly empty. One pickup truck, one sedan with a cracked tail light. Room doors shut tight, curtains drawn like the place itself didn't want to see what happened here after dark. Mara drove past the entrance. Then she stopped. She checked her mirrors. Nothing. No headlights. No movement. Just the low hum of the highway in the distance, and the faint buzzing of the sign overhead. She exhaled once through her nose, put the car in reverse, and backed into the lot. She didn't park close. Never did. She took a spot near the edge, engine off, door open just long enough for her to listen. That was when she heard it. Not a scream, not a shout, a sound closer to breathing, but wrong. Wet. Uneven. Like air being dragged through something that shouldn't be open. Mara closed the car door without slamming it and walked toward the row of rooms, boots splashing softly through shallow water. The sound was coming from the far end, near a room with a door that hadn't fully closed. Room 12. The number hung crooked, one screw missing. Mara didn't reach for a weapon. She didn't announce herself. She stood just to the side of the doorframe and listened. Breathing slower now. Ragged. Then a voice, barely there. Help. Mara stepped inside. The room smelled like old smoke and copper. A single lamp burned on the nightstand, casting yellow light across stained carpet and unmade sheets. The man on the floor looked too thin for his clothes, like they were borrowed from someone stronger. Blood soaked through his shirt, dark and spreading, one hand pressed uselessly against his side. His eyes found her immediately. Not relief. Recognition. You're not a cop, he said. It wasn't a question. No. Mara replied. I'm not. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Good. She knelt beside him, careful not to touch yet. She needed to see the wound, understand how bad it was before she lied to him about help coming. How long have you been here? She asked. Too long. His breath hitched. They said I'd be safe if I stayed quiet. Who said? He swallowed hard. Doesn't matter. It does if you want to live. That earned a quiet laugh that turned into a cough. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. Mara reached out then, pressing down gently near the wound, adjusting her hand when he flinched. The injury was bad. Deep. He'd lost too much blood already. She met his eyes again. You don't have much time, she said, voice steady. So you can tell me what happened, or you can tell me who did this. But you don't have enough breath for both. His gaze searched her face like he was weighing something heavier than pain. They found me, he said finally. I thought I'd erased everything. I thought it was buried. What was? He shook his head weakly. Not what. Who? Mara felt that tightening again. The pattern forming. Say the name, she said. He inhaled, shallow and sharp. You already know it. I don't. His grip tightened suddenly on her sleeve, stronger than she expected. Tell her, he whispered. Tell Cross, she missed one. The room seemed to shrink. Mara stilled. Cross, she repeated. His eyes flickered, unfocused now. She signed it. The report clean, final. Said it was over. What was over? Mara pressed. He shook his head again, panic flashing through the haze. No. No more names. Names get people killed. You're already dying, Mara said, not unkindly. That's the point, he whispered. I paid for silence. I didn't pay for erasure. His breathing stuttered. His hand fell from her sleeve. Mara leaned closer. Listen to me. Who is she? His eyes found hers one last time. Detective, he said. The one who doesn't miss details. Then his body went still. For a moment, Mara stayed exactly where she was. Hand pressed against cooling flesh. Eyes fixed on a face that no longer needed to lie. Outside, a car passed on the highway, tires hissing against wet pavement. Somewhere, a door slammed. Life continuing indifferent. Mara stood slowly. She looked around the room again, this time with sharper eyes. No wallet. No phone. The window cracked open just enough to let rain smell in. The door lock broken from the inside. This wasn't random. She stepped back into the night just as distant sirens began to rise. Not close, but coming. Someone else had called it in, or someone wanted the response logged. Mara didn't wait to find out which. She drove until the motel sign was nothing but red noise in her mirrors. She stopped 20 minutes later at a gas station that never closed, one of those places that sold coffee strong enough to hurt and sandwiches that had learned patience. She didn't go inside. She sat in the car, engine idling, rain ticking softly against the windshield. Tell Cross, she murmured aloud. She'd heard the name before. Not personally, not directly. It floated in the background of other stories, attached to cases that closed cleanly and quietly. The kind of detective other detectives spoke about carefully. The kind who didn't leave loose ends. Mara reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook. Not a phone. Never a phone. Paper didn't betray you unless you let it. She wrote the motel name, the room number, the man's last words. She underlined one sentence twice. She missed one. Mara closed the notebook and leaned her head back against the seat. Someone had used the system to make a person disappear. And someone else had decided that mistake needed to be corrected. With blood. That wasn't about money, that was about control. By morning, the news called it a robbery gone wrong. An unidentified male. No suspects, no witnesses. A routine tragedy in a place no one expected justice to visit. Mara watched the report on a muted television in a diner 2 towns over. She didn't eat. She never did after a night like that. She caught the name when it scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Lead investigator Detective Elena Cross. Mara's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She finished her coffee, left exact change on the counter, and walked back out into the daylight like the night hadn't carved something new into her. But it had. She could feel it already. An old case breathing again, a truth that refused to stay buried. And for the first time in a long while, Mara wasn't chasing a ghost. She was chasing a woman who'd sworn there weren't any left. Mara didn't go home after the diner. Home was a concept she used sparingly. A place became dangerous once it learned your habits, once the walls began to expect you. Instead, she drove until the city thinned out and the buildings grew shorter, older, less interested in pretending they were alive. She parked near a public library that had closed 2 hours earlier. Lights off, doors locked. Cameras mounted high enough to be lazy. Perfect. She sat in the car for a full minute before moving, letting the rhythm of the road fade from her body. Nights like the one she just had didn't leave cleanly. They stayed in the muscles, in the shallow ache behind the eyes. Tell Cross. She missed one. Mara pulled her notebook from her bag again, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote the sentence out in careful block letters, not because she needed to remember it, but because she needed to see it sit still. Missed one. That meant there had been more than one. It meant something had been counted, reviewed, and declared finished. And it meant someone was wrong. Mara had built her life around people who didn't exist on paper. The system was good at erasing without killing. It didn't need violence. Violence only came later, when someone noticed the gap. She opened her laptop, the old one she kept offline unless absolutely necessary. It booted slow, fan whining like a tired animal. She connected to a secured network she trusted only because it hadn't failed her yet. She started with the motel. Nothing unusual, no missing persons linked. no open cases. The dead man was already slipping into anonymity, exactly where someone had wanted him. She tried the name the clerk had muttered to the police when she passed by earlier. Half a syllable, uncertain. Nothing. Mara leaned back, eyes closing briefly. Then she changed tactics. Instead of searching for him, she searched for absence. Hospitals with no discharge records, shelters with intake numbers that didn't balance, court filings that referenced individuals who never appeared again. It took almost an hour before something blinked back at her, a woman. No photo, no current address, no social footprint after 5 years ago. But the file wasn't empty, it was finished. Mara leaned forward. The woman's name was listed once, then struck through, not deleted, redacted. A notation followed administrative resolution. No death certificate, no relocation record, no witness protection flag, just gone. Mara felt the now familiar tightening in her chest. She scrolled down. Assigned investigator Elena Cross. Mara exhaled slowly through her nose. So this was the one. By sunrise, Mara had everything the public system would give her, which wasn't much. Enough to know the woman had once existed in full color. Employment records, a lease, a traffic violation for rolling through a stop sign on a rainy Tuesday. Then nothing. No obituary, no legal trail, no proof she'd ever stopped breathing. Mara closed the laptop and sat there as the sky lightened from black to dull gray. The missing woman hadn't vanished because she was weak. She had vanished because someone had decided she needed to. The address tied to the woman's last known lease led Mara to a row of townhouses near the industrial district. Brickwork patched unevenly. Windows barred not for safety, but for expectation. Mara walked the block slowly, hands in her coat pockets, eyes relaxed. Looking like you belonged mattered more than actually belonging. She stopped at the third unit. The mailbox still bore the woman's name, scratched, half-peeled, but present. That mattered. People removed names when they wanted to forget. They left them when they were afraid of what forgetting might cost. Mara knocked. No answer. She knocked again louder. A door opened 2 units down. A woman in her 60s peered out, eyes sharp despite the lines carved into her face. "She doesn't live here anymore," the woman said. Mara turned slightly, not fully facing her. Non-threatening. "I know," Mara replied. "I'm trying to find out where she went." The woman snorted softly. "Aren't we all?" She leaves suddenly. The woman hesitated. Then opened the door wider. "You a cop?" "No." "That's what they all say." Mara met her gaze. "Cops don't knock twice." That earned a thin smile. "She didn't leave," the woman said. "Not like people leave. One day she was here. Next day, men came. Suits, quiet. They took boxes. Not many. What about her?" The woman shook her head. "Never saw her again." Mara felt the air shift. "Did anyone file a report?" she asked. The woman laughed, short and humorless. "Who would listen?" Mara nodded. She knew that answer well. As she turned to leave, the woman spoke again. "You should stop," she said. "People who ask about her don't do well." Mara paused, then glanced back. "Did someone tell you that?" The woman's jaw tightened. "Yes." "Ooh." She shook her head. "Doesn't matter. Name or no name, they're still watching." Mara walked away without arguing. Fear was honest. It didn't need convincing. That afternoon, Mara did something she rarely did. She went somewhere public on purpose. The police precinct wasn't hard to find. It rose out of the city like a concrete apology, all right angles and reflective glass. Mara didn't go inside. She didn't need to. She sat across the street in a cafe with too much light and not enough warmth, watching the doors. She didn't know what she was waiting for. She just knew she'd recognize it. Time passed. Then a woman exited alone, tall, controlled. Hair pulled back with no interest in softness. She moved like someone who didn't waste energy on uncertainty. Mara's breath slowed. Even from across the street, she could see it. The weight of unfinished cases carried carefully, like glass that might shatter if handled wrong. This was the detective from the file. This was Elena Cross. Mara didn't follow her. Not yet. She watched her walk to her car, pause briefly like she'd forgotten something, then drive away. Mara stayed seated long after she was gone. So this was the woman who didn't miss details. the woman who'd signed off on an erasure. By nightfall, Mara had a clearer picture, and it was worse than she'd expected. The missing woman wasn't the only one. There were others. Different names. Different years. Same pattern. Present. Documented. Closed. Each time the same investigator. Each time the same quiet finality. Mara spread the notes out across the motel room she'd taken for the night. A different motel. Cleaner. Brighter. Less blood in its history. She stood in the middle of the room, hands on her hips, staring down at the web forming on the floor. This wasn't corruption. Corruption was sloppy. This was belief. Someone believed this was necessary. Mara sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed her face with both hands. She'd expected to chase a shadow, not collide with a wall. Elena Cross wasn't a villain. Not in the way Mara understood villains. Which meant whatever came next would be worse. The message arrived just before midnight. No sender. No number. Just text. Stop looking. Mara stared at the screen. Then another. You don't know what you're interfering with. She typed back once. Neither did she. The reply came almost immediately. This is your only warning. Mara powered the phone off. Warnings were admissions. They meant she was close. She lay back on the bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling, the hum of electricity filling the silence. Two women now stood at the center of the same truth. One had buried it. The other was digging it back up. And somewhere between them was a woman who had never been allowed to exist long enough to be missed. Mara slept for exactly 90 minutes. She knew because she counted backward from the moment her eyes closed to the moment her phone vibrated against the cheap motel nightstand. She woke without confusion, without panic. Her body had learned long ago how to surface cleanly when rest was a luxury instead of a habit. The phone vibrated again. Not a call, no sound, just insistence. She picked it up, powered it on, and read the message without changing her expression. We told you to stop. Mara didn't reply. She swung her legs off the bed, stood and crossed to the window. Outside, the parking lot was half full now. Travelers, late arrivals, people who believed the night ended when the door locked behind them. She didn't. She watched the reflections in the glass, scanning for movement that didn't belong. A man pacing, a car that didn't leave, a shape that stayed too still. Nothing obvious, which meant she had time. Time was something you used or lost. It never waited. Mara dressed quickly, grabbed her notebook, and left the room without checking out. She drove until the city changed again, this time toward older buildings and narrower streets, places where records still existed on paper, because no one had paid to erase them yet. The municipal archives sat in the basement of a courthouse that pretended modernity, but smelled like dust and resignation. The clerk barely looked up when Mara signed in under a name that wasn't hers. Research was a language. You spoke it fluently, or you exposed yourself. Mara spoke it well. She requested closed files. Not specific cases, categories, administrative resolutions, internal memoranda, supplemental closures tied to missing persons. The clerk frowned, then shrugged. You know these are incomplete. Everything is, Mara said. The boxes arrived 20 minutes later, cardboard worn thin, labels faded. Time had done its work quietly here. Mara rolled up her sleeves. She started with the earliest year she'd seen Elena Cross's name attached to. She flipped pages slowly, scanning margins, handwritten notes, stamps pressed hard enough to leave impressions through multiple sheets. She wasn't looking for proof. She was looking for consistency. It didn't take long. Different cases. Different circumstances. Same language. No further action required. Resolution achieved. Risk mitigated. Mara's jaw tightened. These weren't conclusions, they were justifications. Halfway through the third box, she found something different. A memo. Unsigned, but unmistakably deliberate. Subject declined witness protection. Administrative resolution approved to prevent collateral exposure. Mara read it twice. Then a third time. Witness protection wasn't declined lightly. It came with interviews, evaluations, layers of documentation. This had none. She checked the case number. It belonged to a woman whose name appeared once, then never again. Another ghost. Mara closed her eyes briefly. This wasn't negligence. This was a system designed to disappear people who complicated narratives. And Elena Cross had been the hand steady enough to carry it out. By late afternoon, Mara had copied what she could without drawing attention. She didn't photograph anything. She didn't steal pages. She memorized patterns and wrote summaries in her notebook, using shorthand no one else would understand. As she packed up, the clerk glanced at her again. "You find what you were looking for?" Mara met his eyes. Not yet. That was the truth. She didn't leave immediately. Instead, she sat in her car across the street and reviewed what she had. 5 confirmed cases, possibly more. All women, all flagged as potential risks. Not criminals, not suspects, but inconvenient variables, witnesses. Victims. People who knew too much too early. The same question hovered over every file: risk to whom? Mara didn't believe in lone architects when structures this clean existed. Someone had designed the rules. Someone had decided which lives were acceptable losses. Elena Cross had enforced those rules, but enforcement wasn't origin. That distinction mattered. The call came just as Mara was pulling back into traffic. A block number. She let it ring twice before answering. "You're persistent," a woman's voice said. Calm, measured, controlled. Mara smiled faintly. "So are you," she replied. A pause. "You were warned." "You sent a warning," Mara corrected. "Warnings imply choice. You're making this harder than it needs to be. That depends on who it needs to be easy for." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Finally, the woman spoke again. "You don't understand the scope." "Then explain it." "I can't." "Then we're done here." Mara ended the call before the woman could respond. She didn't need to guess who it was. Elena Cross didn't waste words. She didn't threaten. She didn't plead. She managed. And right now she was trying to manage Mara. That night, Mara returned to the motel room she'd abandoned earlier, not to stay but to check. The door had been opened, not forced. Opened, the room looked untouched at first glance. Bed still rumpled, lamp still on, but the air felt wrong, like a conversation that had paused mid-sentence. Mara scanned quickly. Her notebook was gone. She stood very still. That wasn't intimidation. That was escalation. They didn't want to scare her off. They wanted to see what she'd do next. Mara exhaled slowly and laughed under her breath. "Bad choice," she murmured. She didn't go back to her car. She walked. 3 blocks down, she ducked into a late night laundromat, the kind that stayed open because no one cared enough to close it. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A woman slept in a chair with a coat over her face. Mara sat across from her, pulled a second notebook from her bag, the one she never used unless the first one disappeared, and began to rewrite everything from memory. Names, dates, patterns. She didn't rush. If they were watching, she wanted them to see this part. She wanted them to understand something important. Erasing paper didn't erase people. By dawn, Mara had a new list. Not victims, decision points. Moments where a different choice could have been made. Moments where Elena Cross had chosen closure over consequence. Mara folded the list and slipped it into her coat. She didn't know yet whether Elena Cross was an obstacle or an ally. But she knew this: the woman, who didn't miss details, had been trained to ignore certain ones, and someone had taught her how. As Mara stepped back out into the morning, her phone vibrated once more. A new message. "This ends if you walk away." Mara typed her response slowly, deliberately. It already ended for them. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and walked into the rising day, carrying truths that refused to stay redacted. Mara learned more about Elena Cross by not asking about her. That was the trick. You didn't walk into places and say the name out loud. Names like that carried weight, and weight shifted rooms in ways that drew attention. Instead, you listened. You let other people bring her up on their own terms. It didn't take long. At a bar that opened before noon and closed only when the owner passed out, a retired patrol officer talked too loudly about how things used to be done, before everyone got soft. He never said Elena's name, but he didn't need to. "She closed cases," he said, tapping his glass for emphasis. "Didn't leave bodies hanging around waiting for lawsuits. That count for something." Across town, in a cramped office above a bail bonds shop, a former public defender spoke more carefully. She was thorough. The woman said, eyes narrowing, But thorough doesn't always mean just. Sometimes it just means final. Mara nodded, letting silence do the work. In a diner near the courthouse, a clerk whispered the name like it might hear her. "She's respected," the clerk said. "Even the people who don't like her don't say it out loud. You don't rise that fast without knowing where the lines are." That was the phrase Mara heard most often. Knowing where the lines are. Not crossing them. Not erasing them. Just knowing where they were drawn. And who had drawn them. By the third day, Mara had mapped Elena Cross's reputation more clearly than her case history. Elena was dependable, predictable, clean. She was the detective they assigned when they needed something to end without noise. That wasn't praise. It was utility. Mara sat alone in her car outside a courthouse annex, rain streaking the windshield, watching people come and go. She wasn't waiting for Elena. She wasn't ready for that yet. She was waiting for someone else to slip. The system always leaked at the edges. The trick was standing still long enough to see where. The slip came in the form of a man in his early 40s, walking with the stiff posture of someone who'd spent too many years keeping his spine straight on command. He exited the building, paused like he was deciding whether to smoke, then thought better of it. Mara followed at a distance. 2 blocks later, he ducked into a cafe that served burnt coffee and tolerated long silences. Mara took a seat 2 tables away, back to the wall. She didn't need to hear everything, just enough. The man was talking to the barista, voice low but tight. "She's not wrong," he said. "I'm just saying, there were decisions made. Above all of us." The barista shrugged. "That's always the case." "Yeah," the man replied, but not everyone was comfortable signing off. Mara's fingers tightened around her cup. Signing off. She stood, walked past his table as if leaving, then paused. "Excuse me," she said lightly. "Is this seat taken?" The man looked up, startled. "No." She sat. "You sound like someone who understands discomfort," Mara said, not unkindly. The man studied her face, wary. "Do I know you?" No," Mara replied. "But you know the kind of thing I'm asking about." Silence stretched. The barista drifted away. The man exhaled slowly. "You shouldn't be asking." Mara smiled faintly. "Everyone says that. It's never been true yet." He hesitated, then leaned back in his chair. "You looking to write something?" "I'm looking to understand something." "Same thing?" "Usually. Not this time." He studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. "You don't understand what kind of shield you're poking. Then tell me who's holding it." His jaw tightened. "She didn't act alone," he said quietly. "But she was the face, the steady hand. You want to blame someone, she's convenient." Mara leaned in slightly. "Convenient doesn't mean wrong." "No," he admitted. "But it means incomplete." That word again. Incomplete. He stood abruptly. "I shouldn't have said anything." "You already did," Mara said gently. "You can still decide what it means." He didn't reply. He left cash on the table and walked out without looking back. Mara stayed seated long after he was gone. So Elena Cross wasn't the architect, but she was the keystone. That night, Mara dreamed for the first time since the motel. She stood in a long hallway lined with doors. Each one had a name scratched into the wood. Some were deep. Some were barely there. At the end of the hall, a woman stood with her back turned, holding a file. Mara tried to speak. The woman didn't turn around. When Mara woke, her hands were clenched so tightly her nails had drawn blood. The pressure shifted on the 4th day. It wasn't subtle. Mara returned to her car to find a citation tucked under the wiper. Expired registration. She checked the date. It wasn't expired. She didn't contest it. Contesting meant names. Names meant trails. Later, a storage unit she'd rented months earlier was suddenly under review. No explanation. No timeline. By evening, her bank flagged a transaction she hadn't made. Nothing illegal. Nothing aggressive. Just enough friction to slow her down. Mara laughed softly as she locked herself into yet another anonymous room. "Now we're talking," she murmured. This wasn't Elena's style. This was institutional, which meant Elena knew, and hadn't stopped it. Mara decided it was time to test something. She placed a call using a number she never reused. It rang once before connecting. Yes, Elena Cross's voice said. Alert. No warnings this time, Mara asked. A pause. Not surprise. Calculation. You don't understand what you're stepping into, Elena said. You keep saying that, Mara replied. You haven't explained why, because explanation doesn't change outcomes. That's where we differ. Silence again. You've been looking into my closed cases, Elena said finally. I've been looking into missing women. Those cases were resolved. They were sealed. For a reason. Woos. Elena didn't answer. Mara pressed. You didn't kill them. You didn't traffic them. You didn't profit. So why protect the outcome? Another pause. Longer this time. Because sometimes, Elena said carefully, justice isn't about saving everyone. Mara felt something harden behind her ribs. No, she said. It's about deciding who's worth losing. The line went dead. Mara stared at the phone, then set it down. That was the first crack. Not in Elena's confidence. In her certainty. Later that night, Mara sat in her car outside the precinct again. She watched the windows, the lights that stayed on long after others went dark. Somewhere in there, Elena Cross was still working. Still carrying files. Still convincing herself that what she'd done had prevented something worse. Mara didn't hate her. That worried her. Because hate was simple. It drew clean lines. Understanding was dangerous. Understanding made room for collaboration. And Mara wasn't sure yet whether she wanted that. As dawn crept in, Mara wrote one last line in her notebook, legends survive because too many people need them too. She closed the book, slid it into her coat, and stepped out into the early morning air. Elena Cross's name wouldn't stay buried. Not because Mara wanted to expose it, but because truth had a way of resurfacing when it realized someone was finally willing to look at it without flinching. The rain had returned by evening, thin and persistent, the kind that didn't announce itself but soaked you anyway. Mara stood across the street from the parking structure, collar turned up, hands in her pockets, watching the exit ramp with the patience of someone who understood timing better than urgency. She wasn't following Elena Cross. She was waiting for inevitability. It came just after 7. The structure's lights flickered as a dark sedan rolled down the ramp and paused at the exit, brake lights glowing red against the wet concrete. The driver hesitated. Not long, just long enough to register a decision being made. Mara crossed the street. She didn't rush. Didn't signal. She stepped into the edge of the sedan's headlights like she belonged there, like this was always where the night was headed. The car stopped. The window lowered halfway. Elena Cross looked at her with eyes that had seen too many endings to be startled by beginnings. You're blocking traffic, Elena said. Mara smiled faintly. You're off duty. That doesn't change the law. No, Mara agreed. But it changes what you can pretend not to see. Rain tapped against the roof of the car. Somewhere behind them, a horn sounded once, impatient. Elena studied her more closely now. Not as a threat, as a variable. Get in, Elena said. It wasn't an invitation. Mara opened the passenger door and slid inside. The car smelled faintly of old coffee and paper, files that never quite left your clothes. Elena pulled away from the curb smoothly, merging into traffic without another glance. They drove in silence for 3 blocks. Why here? Elena asked finally. Because you don't expect conversations to start in the open, Mara replied. You expect them to end there. You, Elena huffed quietly. You're not wrong. They stopped at a light. Elena's fingers tapped the steering wheel once, then stilled. You've been busy, she said. So have you. I asked you to walk away. You warned me. Dumb? Same thing. Not to me. Not to me. The light changed. Elena drove on. You don't know the full scope. Elena said again, but there was less certainty in it now. Less armor. You keep saying that? Mara replied, which tells me 2 things. Oh, 1, you believe it. And 2, you don't actually want me to stop. Elena's jaw tightened. That's not true. Then you would have had me arrested. Elena glanced at her for the first time since the car had started moving. The look was sharp, assessing. I don't arrest people for asking questions. No, Mara said. You resolve them. Silence pressed in again, heavier this time. They pulled into a side street lined with warehouses converted into offices, most dark at this hour. Elena parked beneath a flickering streetlight and shut off the engine. The sudden quiet felt deliberate. Say what you came to say, Elena said. Mara turned fully toward her. You missed one. Elena didn't react, not outwardly, but something shifted behind her eyes, a tightening Mara recognized. I didn't. Elena said evenly. You did, Mara replied, and someone died trying to tell me. Elena exhaled slowly through her nose. People die for a lot of reasons. Not like that. Like what? Like someone correcting a ledger. Elena's hand stilled on the wheel. Who told you? She asked. A man you erased. I didn't erase anyone. You signed off on it. That's not the same thing. Amara leaned back slightly. That's what everyone says right before they explain why it is. Elena turned then, fully, her face illuminated by the streetlight's uneven glow. You think you understand what that means? She asked. Signing off. I think it means you decided the risk of letting her exist outweighed the cost of making her disappear. Elena's eyes narrowed. You don't know what she was involved in. I know what she wasn't. Mara said. A criminal. A killer. A threat. Elena laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. Threat isn't always about violence. Then explain it to me. Elena looked away out the windshield, rain streaking the glass like static. There are cases, she said carefully, where the truth causes more damage than silence. Mara nodded. That's the line, isn't it? Elena's voice sharpened. That's reality. No, Mara said. That's triage. Elena's jaw tightened again. You want to judge me? Fine. But you don't see the aftermath. You don't see what happens when the wrong information hits the wrong people. I see what happens when people vanish, Mara said quietly. I see the holes they leave. Elena looked at her then, really looked. Who are you? She asked. Mara considered the question. Someone who picks up what gets dropped, she said. Sometimes on purpose. Elena nodded once, as if confirming something. You left the system, she said. I remember your name now. Mara's expression didn't change. Most people don't. You didn't leave quietly. I left alive. Elena absorbed that. They sat there, two women bound by different definitions of responsibility, rain filling the space neither was willing to occupy with apology. You shouldn't be doing this, Elena said at last. You're poking at something bigger than you. So are you. Mara replied. I'm inside it. That's worse. Elena's lips twitched. You think I don't know that? Mara softened, just slightly. I think you've been telling yourself it's under control for a long time. Elena looked down at her hands. They were steady. Too steady. There were parameters, she said. Oversight. Checks. And when the checks failed. Elena didn't answer. Mara leaned forward. You didn't miss one because you're careless. You missed one because you were trained not to look. That landed. Elena's shoulders shifted. A fractional slump she corrected immediately. You don't know that, she said. I do, Mara replied. Because the same thing almost happened to me. That got Elena's attention. She turned slowly. What do you mean? Mara met her gaze. I was almost a ghost. Silence. You signed off on someone else. Mara continued. Someone whose file looks just like hers. Only difference is, I didn't disappear. Elena's eyes widened just enough to betray her. That's impossible, she said. Is it? Mara asked. Or did someone decide I was more trouble erased than alive? Elena stared at her, processing, recalculating. If that's true, she said slowly, then, the system you trusted made a mistake. Mara finished. And you helped clean it up. The rain intensified, drumming harder against the car. Elena looked forward again, swallowing. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to know something, Mara said. Elena waited. Did you ever wonder where they went? Elena closed her eyes. Just for a second. Yes, she said. That was the second crack. Mara opened the door. "We're not allies," she said as she stepped out. "Not yet." Elena didn't stop her. "But we're not enemies either," Mara continued. "That depends on what you do next." She shut the door gently. As Mara walked away, Elena remained in the car, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. For the first time in years, a closed case felt open again. And that terrified her. Mara didn't look back after she closed the car door. She walked until the rain soaked through her coat, and the streetlight glow thinned into shadow. The night had shifted, less watchful now, more alert. The kind of night that carried consequences instead of warnings. Behind her, Elena Cross sat alone in her car longer than she meant to. She replayed the conversation the way she replayed old interrogations, isolating words, tone, timing. Mara hadn't threatened her. That was the problem. Threats were manageable. They had procedures. Truth didn't. Mara took the long way back. She cut through alleys and side streets, changed direction twice for no reason other than habit. When she finally reached her car, she checked beneath it before opening the door. Nothing. That didn't mean anything. It just meant whoever was watching had decided to wait. She drove until the city thinned again, until the roads forgot their names and became numbers. A rest stop appeared like an afterthought. Bathrooms, vending machines, fluorescent lights that never slept. Mara parked near the edge, engine running. She pulled out her phone and powered it on. No new messages. She smiled faintly. They were regrouping. Elena returned to the precinct despite telling herself she wouldn't. Her office light flicked on, illuminating stacks of files she'd memorized long ago. She didn't sit. She stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the building breathe. Mara's words echoed where other voices had failed to linger. "You were trained not to look." Elena crossed the room and unlocked a filing cabinet she rarely opened anymore. Inside were old cases. Resolved, archived, finished, or so she'd believed. She pulled one at random, then another. She didn't read them closely. She didn't need to. She read the margins. That was where Dot lived. By morning, the pressure arrived openly. Mara felt it when she tried to access a database she'd used for years. Credentials rejected. No explanation. She felt it when a former contact didn't answer her call, and then texted 30 minutes later with a single line, "Can't help you. Don't ask again." Mara didn't respond. She didn't need to. Pressure like this wasn't meant to stop you. It was meant to define the cost of continuing. She welcomed clarity. Elena was called into a meeting just before noon. No agenda, no warning. 3 people already seated when she arrived. 2 she recognized, 1 she didn't. The door closed behind her. "We're concerned," one of them said. Elena didn't sit. "About your involvement." "With what?" The unfamiliar man folded his hands. "An independent actor." Elena's jaw tightened. "You mean Mara?" Silence answered her. "That's not appropriate," one of the others said. "It's accurate," Elena replied. "And you didn't bring me here to play language games." The unfamiliar man studied her. "Brought you here because you understand boundaries." Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. "She doesn't," the man continued, "and she's attracting attention. She's asking questions." Elena said, "That's not a crime." "No," he agreed, "but persistence can become one." Elena leaned forward. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" The man smiled thinly. "Reassert control." Mara spent the afternoon doing nothing that looked like progress. She sat in public places. She blended. She listened. That was when she noticed the tail. Not close, not sloppy, just present enough to be felt. She didn't confront it. She didn't lose it. She let it stay. If someone wanted to watch, she wanted to know how patient they were. Elena left the meeting with a migraine and a decision she didn't want to name yet. She drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, passing streets she knew too well, neighborhoods she'd written reports about and never returned to. She pulled over near a park and sat, hands resting uselessly in her lap. Reassert control. That was what they always said when truth threatened structure. Her phone buzzed. A message. "You need to stop her." Elena stared at the screen. For the first time in her career, she didn't immediately know how. Mara entered the public records office just before closing. She wasn't there for files. She was there to be seen. The clerk recognized her now. That was fine. Recognition cut both ways. As Mara signed the log, she felt it. The shift in the room. The subtle recalibration of attention. Good. Let them know she wasn't hiding. Elena arrived just as the building was locking down. She spotted Mara immediately, standing at the counter, calm, unhurried. For a moment, Elena considered walking away. She didn't. 5 minutes. Elena said quietly as she approached. Mara glanced at her, then nodded. You're generous. They stepped outside together into the cooling air. You're escalating? Elena said. So are you. I'm trying to contain this. You're trying to bury it. Elena's voice sharpened. I'm trying to keep people alive. Mara met her gaze, then stopped, deciding who gets erased. Elena flinched. You don't understand the consequences, she said. I understand them intimately, Mara replied. That's why I won't stop. Elena studied her face, searching for hesitation. She found none. This ends badly, Elena said. Only if you keep standing in front of it, Mara replied. They stood there, the space between them heavy with choices neither could delegate. Finally, Elena spoke again. If you continue, she said, they will come for you. Mara smiled, not unkindly. They already are. And if I don't stop them, then you're choosing a side. Elena closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had shifted, not resolved, but unsettled. I can't protect you, she said. I didn't ask you to, Mara replied. Just don't help them. That was the line. Elena nodded once. A promise, or the closest thing to one. That night Mara moved. She changed locations, changed routines, changed the rules of engagement. If the system wanted control, she'd give it unpredictability. Somewhere else in the city, Elena sat at her desk, staring at a file she'd reopened without authorization. A name stared back at her. A woman who officially did not exist. For the first time, Elena Cross didn't close the folder. Mara worked best when no one knew where she was. By dawn, she had crossed the city twice, slept in her car once, and switched vehicles with someone who didn't ask questions because questions weren't part of the agreement. The new car smelled like citrus cleaner and old receipts, anonymous enough to disappear into traffic. She liked it. If the pressure was going to continue, and it would, then she needed to move faster than the narrative forming around her. She didn't chase Elena Cross. That mattered. If Mara wanted leverage, she could have followed Elena for days, mapped her routines, learned where the cracks were. But leverage was about control, and control was what had built this mess in the first place. Instead, Mara went back to the beginning, not the files. The people. The missing woman's name was still scratched onto a mailbox in a neighborhood most maps pretended didn't exist. That meant someone had loved her long enough to keep the memory inconvenient. Mara knocked on doors again. Different doors this time. She didn't ask about the woman directly. She asked about time. When did things change? When did people stop leaving lights on? When did strangers start knowing your name? Patterns surfaced quickly. Men in suits. Not police, not criminals, quiet, efficient, always polite, always alone or in pairs, and always followed by absence. Mara recorded everything mentally. She didn't write it down. Paper had become a liability again. By mid-morning, she had a name. Not a real one, a handle, Hollis, no last name, no record. But everyone she spoke to recognized it instantly. He fixed things. One man said, he made problems go away. Another added, he worked with the police. Someone whispered. That last part interested her. Across the city, Elena Cross sat in her office with the door locked. She hadn't slept. Her desk was divided cleanly now, official cases on the left, unofficial on the right. The right stack shouldn't exist. She had reopened 3 closed investigations under the pretense of internal review. That bought her time, not safety. Time was enough for now. Elena didn't look for patterns the way Mara did. She looked for fractures. She reviewed call logs, interdepartmental emails, and meeting minutes from years back. Any place where language softened unnaturally. She found it in committee notes. External liaison approved. Risk assessment delegated. Non-standard resolution accepted. Elena traced the approvals backward. They converged on the same office. Not a department. A task group. Defunct. Rebranded twice. Buried under administrative restructuring. But still reachable. Elena sat back slowly. This wasn't just about missing women. This was about jurisdiction laundering. Mara felt the shift before she saw it. Her tale changed. Different vehicle. Different distance. More confident. She smiled. Good. She led them somewhere crowded. Then somewhere narrow. Then somewhere inconvenient. When she finally slipped away, she left them with exactly what she wanted them to have. A question. Elena made a call she shouldn't have. The kind of call that logged itself 3 ways and couldn't be undone. I need the archived roster, she said. Task group. External liaison. 10 years ago. The silence on the other end lasted half a beat too long. That's restricted, the voice said. I have authorization. Another pause. Longer this time. Who authorized it? Elena didn't hesitate. I did. That was the moment. She knew it even as the words left her mouth. She had stepped out of containment. Mara met Hollis in a place that didn't exist on paper. An abandoned transit office beneath a closed station, accessed through a service stairwell no one maintained anymore. Hollis arrived alone, just as predicted. He was older than she expected, calm, ordinary, dangerous. You don't look like law enforcement, he said. I'm not, Mara replied. You don't look like a journalist either. I'm not that either. Hollis studied her. Then you're wasting my time. No, Mara said. You're wasting mine. That earned a small smile. You're asking about people who don't want to be found, Hollis said. I'm asking about people who weren't given a choice. Hollis shrugged. Choice is a luxury. So is survival, Mara replied. They circled each other verbally for nearly an hour. Hollis never admitted anything directly. He didn't need to. He confirmed enough by what he refused to deny. You worked with the police, Mara said. I worked with systems. Hollis corrected. Police just happened to be one of them. Who signed off? Hollis tilted his head. You already know the name you're supposed to say. Mara didn't flinch. She didn't build you. No, he agreed. She maintained us. That landed. Maintenance wasn't creation, but it was complicity. Elena received the roster just after noon. 6 names, 2 crossed out, 1 reassigned, 1 retired, and 1 still active under a different title, Hollis. Elena felt the air leave her lungs slowly. So this was the shadow she'd been working alongside, not knowingly, but knowingly enough. She stared at the file until the words blurred. Mara's voice echoed again. You were trained not to look. Elena closed the folder. Then she reopened it. Mara left the meeting with Hollis alive on purpose. Dead men ended conversations. Living ones panicked. By nightfall, she felt it again. The tightening, the sense of inevitability. She wasn't alone in the hunt anymore. She checked her phone. 1 missed call. Blocked number. She didn't return it. She didn't need to. Elena drove without direction again. Her hands were steady on the wheel, but her mind was racing ahead of procedure. She was already mapping consequences, fallout, exposure. If she continued, she would burn bridges she'd spent a career building. If she stopped, she would become what Mara believed her to be. She hated that choice. She dialed a number and disconnected before it rang. Then she dialed again. This line isn't secure, Mara said when she answered. Elena exhaled. Neither is silence anymore. A pause. You found him, Mara said. Yes. So did I. Another pause. Longer this time. They were aligned now. Not together, but facing the same direction. They're watching us both, Elena said. I know. They'll try to isolate you. They already have. They'll offer me protection. Mara's voice hardened slightly. And they'll expect loyalty. Mara smiled on the other end of the line. Elena could hear it. Welcome to the line you warned me about, Mara said. Silence stretched. I'm not ready to cross it, Elena admitted. I didn't ask you to, Mara replied. Just don't erase what you see. Elena closed her eyes. I won't, she said. That was not an alliance, but it was no longer opposition. That night, 2 women reviewed the same name in different places, under different lights, with different rules. And for the first time, the system felt the pressure from both sides at once. The first rule Mara ever learned was simple. If someone wants you scared, they want you predictable. So when the message arrived, clean, direct, unmistakable, she didn't react the way it was designed to make her react. She didn't flee. She didn't call anyone. She didn't even delete it. She finished her coffee, wiped the rim of the mug with a napkin, and folded it carefully before setting it on the counter. Only then did she pull the phone from her pocket and read the words again. This stops tonight. No sender. No explanation. She smiled faintly. Good. Ultimatums meant impatience. Impatience meant cracks. Mara left the cafe and walked 3 blocks before getting into her car. She didn't drive away immediately. She watched reflections in the glass, the way people passed without seeing, the way danger almost always arrived disguised as routine, nothing obvious. Which didn't mean nothing was there. She drove slowly, deliberately, through streets she'd already memorized. She didn't change direction. She didn't accelerate. If someone wanted to follow her, she wanted them comfortable doing it. Half a mile later, the car behind her turned when she turned. Mara exhaled once. There it is. She didn't confront it. She didn't lose it. She let it. Past a hospital, past a fire station, past places cameras expected drama. Then she cut toward a dead zone, an industrial corridor where businesses closed early and the streetlights skipped every third pole. The car stayed back. Professional. She parked under a light that buzzed like it was thinking too hard and stepped out. The car slowed but didn't stop. That told her enough. They weren't there to talk. Across the city, Elena Cross was halfway through rereading a report she'd signed 8 years ago when the power flickered. Once, twice, then stabilized. She froze, listening. The building hummed back into its usual rhythm, but the interruption had done its work. She felt it in her chest, the instinct she'd spent years sanding down into procedure. She picked up her phone. 3 missed calls, all blocked. That wasn't coincidence. That was synchronization. Elena stood, grabbed her coat, and left without logging out. If this was about containment, they were done waiting. Mara heard the sound before she saw it. A sharp crack. Glass. She turned just as her rear window exploded inward, safety glass spraying across the back seat like ice. She ducked instinctively, heart rate spiking but mind clear. Not a gunshot. Thrown. A message. She straightened slowly, scanning the street. The car behind her was already gone. Mara laughed once, sharp and humorless. Amateurs, she muttered. If they'd wanted her dead, they wouldn't have announced it. She reached into the back seat, brushed glass aside, and found what she already knew would be there. An envelope. No stamp. No address. Just her name. Inside was a single photo, the missing woman. Alive, recent, and scared. On the back, one line, last chance. Mara's expression didn't change, but something cold settled behind her ribs. Elena's phone rang as she pulled onto the freeway. This time it wasn't blocked. It was an internal number. She answered without greeting. They're moving. The voice on the other end said, Now. Elena's jaw tightened. On. Who? A pause. Too long? You already know. Elena hung up. She took the next exit without signaling. Mara didn't go home. She didn't go anywhere predictable. She drove until she hit a place that felt wrong, too quiet, too open, too forgotten. A closed drive, in theater. She parked near the edge of the lot, engine off, lights dark. She studied the photo again. The woman's eyes were unmistakable. Alive. That changed everything. They hadn't erased her. They'd stored her, like leverage. Mara's phone vibrated. One call. She answered. Elena? She said. Yes. Elena replied. No question. No hesitation. They contacted you. They escalated. They showed you proof. Wes. Another pause. Where are you? Elena asked. Somewhere they think I'm alone. Elena exhaled. You're not. Mara allowed herself a thin smile. I know. Elena arrived at the drive, in 15 minutes later with her lights off, and her badge buried deep enough it couldn't save her. She parked 2 spaces away and stepped out slowly, hands visible. Mara watched her approach through the cracked windshield, the glow of distant city light outlining a woman who had spent too long being certain. You should have called me sooner, Elena said. I wanted to see how fast they'd move. Mara replied, and they're scared. Elena nodded once. Good. They stood between their cars, wind carrying dust across the empty lot. They have her? Elena said. Yes. They'll use her. They already are. Elena closed her eyes briefly. This is where it gets dangerous. Mara met her gaze. This is where it gets honest. Elena looked at the shattered glass, at the envelope, at the photo. You're not wrong, she said quietly, but you're not safe. Mara shrugged. I stopped being safe the moment I didn't disappear. Elena studied her. You don't flinch, she said. I do, Mara replied. I just don't let it decide. That landed harder than Elena expected. They didn't plan. Not yet. Planning assumed time. This was triage. Elena pulled out her phone and powered it down. Then removed the battery. Mara raised an eyebrow. You really are crossing lines. Elena met her look. I already did. I just admitted it now. They exchanged a glance. Brief. Loaded. Not trust. Recognition. They'll try to isolate us, Elena said. They'll fail, Mara replied. Because they've already done the thing you can't undo. Elena waited. They reminded me why I started this, Mara said, holding up the photo, and they reminded you why you should have stopped sooner. Elena swallowed. Yes, she said. The second message came just after midnight. This one wasn't subtle. You have 24 hours. Mara typed back before Elena could stop her. No, the reply came immediately. Then she disappears for real. Elena stared at the screen. We need to move. Mara nodded. Agreed. How? Mara folded the photo carefully and slid it into her coat. We may think we're choosing. Elena frowned. Choosing what? Compliance, Mara said. On our terms. Elena looked at her sharply. That's a trap. Yes, Mara agreed. For them. As they drove out of the lot in opposite directions, deliberately separating, both women felt the same thing settle into place. This was no longer about uncovering truth. This was about extraction. And somewhere in the city, someone realized too late that intimidation had united the very people it was meant to divide. They didn't meet again that night. That was deliberate. When pressure escalated, proximity became a liability. Separation created uncertainty, and uncertainty was the only thing the network hadn't planned for. Mara drove until the city blurred into industrial quiet, then changed vehicles again. She didn't use favors this time. She used anonymity. A rental under a name that existed just enough to pass scrutiny, paid for with money that had never touched a bank. She parked beneath an overpass where the sound of traffic dissolved everything into white noise and powered down. Only then did she let herself breathe. 24 hours. That wasn't a deadline. It was a test. The network wanted to see which one of them would blink first. Elena didn't go home either. She drove to an evidence lockup no one remembered assigning her access to, one of the many benefits of a career built on quiet reliability. The building was cold, fluorescent lights humming like insects trapped in glass. She shut the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, eyes closed. This was the point of no return. Up until now, she'd lived in the gray, rationalizing decisions, compartmentalizing consequences. But this was active defiance. Elena crossed the room and pulled a single box from the shelf. It wasn't labeled with a case number. It was labeled miscellaneous. That alone was an admission. Mara checked her phone once an hour. Nothing. Good. If they weren't talking, they were watching. She reviewed the photo again, studying the background this time. A corner of brick, a barred window, light from a high angle, basement. Institutional, not a prayer house, not a private house, something repurposed. Mara closed her eyes and let memory surface. Old hospitals, decommissioned shelters, federal buildings sold to private groups under opaque contracts. Storage disguised as care. She opened her notebook and wrote a single line, "They keep what they can't kill." Elena sat at a metal table and opened the box. Inside were fragments. Cases that didn't warrant full folders, partial statements, unfiled photos, notes that never made it into evidence because they complicated closure. She recognized two of the names immediately. women whose disappearances had been resolved under administrative authority. Her authority. Elena swallowed. She hadn't imagined this, she'd known, just not fully enough to stop. She flipped through until a loose page fell free, a memo. Subject transferred to external custody per risk mitigation protocol. External custody. Elena stared at the phrase. That wasn't law enforcement language. That was corporate. She felt something cold settle in her chest. They made contact at dawn. Not by phone. Not directly. Mara used a dead drop that hadn't been touched in years, an old transit locker beneath a closed platform. She left a folded page inside, nothing more. Coordinates. Time. One word limited. Elena found it 3 hours later. She stood on the platform long after reading it, listening to the echo of trains that no longer ran. Limited. That was acceptable. They met at noon in a place neither of them had chosen. A courthouse cafeteria. Too public to be intercepted. Too dull to draw interest. Mara sat first, nursing a cup of coffee she had no intention of finishing. Elena approached without hesitation and sat across from her. No greeting. No acknowledgement. Just two women pretending this was ordinary. You shouldn't have come, Elena said quietly. You did, Mara replied. That was my choice. So was this. Elena's jaw tightened, but she nodded once. Limited, she said. Limited, Mara agreed. They exchanged nothing physical. No files. No phones. Just words. You have her. Elena said. Yes. They're holding her. Wes. Alive. For now. Elena closed her eyes briefly. They won't kill her unless they have to. They won't let her go unless we make it expensive, Mara said. Elena met her gaze. Then we need leverage. Mara smiled faintly. Now you're speaking my language. Elena went first. There's a task group, she said. Defunct on paper, active in practice. External liaisons. Private funding. I know, Mara replied. I met one of them. Elena's eyes sharpened. Hollis. Wes. He doesn't make decisions, Elena said. He executes them. Who does? Elena hesitated. That's where it gets complicated. Try me. The Elena leaned in slightly. They don't have one head. They have consensus. Mara exhaled softly. That's worse. It keeps accountability diffused. Elena continued. No single architect, just agreements. And you were one of them, Mara said gently. Elena didn't flinch. Yes. That was new. That was important. Mara's turn. They're using containment sites, she said. Facilities that used to be something else. Hospitals, shelters, transit hubs. Elena nodded. They repurpose assets. It keeps permits clean. I can narrow locations, Mara continued. But I can't extract her alone. You won't? Elena said. Not anymore. Mara studied her face. This wasn't bravado. This was resolve. They sat in silence for a moment, the cafeteria noise washing around them. This doesn't make us partners, Elena said. No, Mara agreed. It makes us liabilities. Elena almost smiled. Good, she said. They underestimate liabilities. The compromise was simple and dangerous. Mara would continue operating outside the system, drawing attention, forcing movement. Elena would stay inside, reopening cases, triggering audits, creating noise where silence had been policy. They would share only what was necessary, no full pictures, no total trust. If one fell, the other could keep moving. If they come for you, Mara said, they'll expect me to retreat. I won't, Elena replied. If they come for me, Elena said, they'll expect you to disappear. I won't. They held each other's gaze. Not allies, but aligned. They separated again without ceremony. Mara left through the side exit. Elena stayed behind, finishing a glass of water she hadn't ordered. As she stood to leave, her phone vibrated. A message. You're drifting. Elena typed back one word. No. She powered the phone off. That evening, the network made its next move. Mara returned to the overpass to find the space beneath it freshly cleaned. No trash. No markings. No sign anyone had ever been there. That wasn't coincidence. That was erasure. She smiled. Too slow, she murmured. Across the city, Elena was pulled into an emergency review meeting regarding reopened cases she hadn't formally requested. Pressure from above. From the sides. From places she'd trusted. She didn't defend herself. She asked questions instead. That unsettled them more. By midnight, both women understood the same truth. The compromise had shifted the balance. The network could threaten. It could watch. But it could no longer control the narrative from a single point. And somewhere in a room without windows, a woman who officially didn't exist was still breathing, because two other women had decided that compromise was not surrender. Elena Cross hadn't meant to open that file. She told herself she was looking for procedural precedent, something to justify the questions she'd started asking aloud. That was the lie she offered herself because it was easier than admitting the truth. The truth was simpler. She was looking for the moment things changed. The file sat at the bottom of a drawer she hadn't opened in years. No digital backup, no cross-reference, just paper, edges worn soft by time and handling. The tab read only one word. Unresolved. Elena frowned. That wasn't possible. She opened it. The woman's name stared back at her. Not the one from the photo. Not the one the network was holding now. Another, older, the first. Elena felt the room tilt slightly, like her body had recognized something her mind hadn't wanted to. She remembered this case. She remembered the call. A woman had walked into a precinct one rainy afternoon, hair damp, hands shaking, asking for protection she didn't know how to request properly. She hadn't used the right language. She hadn't filled out the right forms. She'd just said she was scared. Elena had listened. That was the part she'd always remembered. The file was thinner than it should have been. Initial intake report. 2 interviews. A risk assessment with more redactions than substance. Then, a memo. Subject identified as potential destabilizing variable. Recommend non-standard resolution. Elena's breath caught. She didn't remember writing that. But the signature was hers. She turned the page. There should have been more. There wasn't. No transfer record. No closure summary. No confirmation of safety. Just absence. Elena sank into her chair. This wasn't administrative efficiency. This was abandonment. She closed her eyes and let memory fill the gaps the file refused to hold. The meeting. She hadn't wanted to go, but she'd been told it was informational. 3 people. 2 she recognized. 1 she didn't. They'd spoken in abstractions. Risks. Exposure. Containment. They hadn't ordered her to do anything. They'd just reframed the question. What was the greater harm? Elena had believed them. Or worse, she'd wanted to. She opened her eyes again and flipped through the pages slowly, deliberately, like speed might change the outcome. It didn't. This woman had vanished inside Elena's career, not erased. Forgotten. Elena pressed her fingers to her temple, feeling the H settle in fully now. You were trained not to look. Mara's voice echoed, uninvited. Elena swallowed. She hadn't missed this case because she was careless. She'd missed it because she'd been rewarded every time she chose closure over uncertainty. Elena stood abruptly and crossed the room, pacing. This wasn't just one mistake. This was the prototype. This was the case that taught her how to live with the rest. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She didn't answer it. She didn't need to see the message to know what it would say. Pressure didn't need language anymore. Across the city, Mara sat in the back of a borrowed car, watching a building that pretended it wasn't occupied. The windows were dark, too dark. No signs, no official markings. Just a converted municipal structure that no one claimed responsibility for anymore. She wasn't certain the woman was there. But she was certain someone was. Mara didn't move closer. Not yet. She took out her notebook and wrote only 1 sentence. They started this before they needed me. Elena returned to her desk and opened another drawer. Then another. She pulled files at random now, scanning for the same language. She found it. Again. And again. Different years. Different names. Same phrases. Risk mitigated. Non-standard resolution. External custody. External. Elena felt sick. She hadn't been working with the network. She had been working for it. Not knowingly. But knowingly enough. She remembered how proud she'd been of her clearance rate. How often she'd been praised for handling sensitive cases with discretion. Discretion. That word burned now. She looked down at her hands. They were steady. They'd always been steady. That was the problem. Elena locked her office door and powered down the overhead lights, leaving only the desk lamp on. She reopened the unfinished file and began reconstructing it from memory. She wrote everything she could recall. Times, places, conversations. She wrote until her hand cramped and her eyes burned. When she finished, the file was thicker than it had ever been. It still wasn't complete. But it was honest. She didn't know how long she sat there, minutes. Hours. Time stopped behaving properly once you acknowledged it. Her phone buzzed again. This time she looked. Mistakes happen. Don't compound them. Elena stared at the message, then typed back. You trained me to close doors. You never taught me how to reopen them. She didn't wait for a reply. She shut the phone off completely. Mara moved just before dawn. She circled the building once, twice, memorizing entrances, exits, blind spots. She noticed something new. A van, unmarked, parked too neatly. Security disguised as maintenance. Mara smiled faintly. They're nervous, she murmured. She didn't approach. She didn't need to. She wanted them watching her from the wrong direction. Elena arrived home after sunrise. She stood in her apartment doorway longer than usual, listening to the familiar quiet that no longer felt neutral. She set the unfinished file on the kitchen table. Not hidden, not locked away. Present. She poured herself coffee she wouldn't drink and stared at the wall across from her. This was the first case she'd never closed, and it had opened everything else. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Mara, she said before the other woman could speak. Wes. I found the first one, Elena said. Silence. Then, quietly, I was wondering when you would. I didn't finish it, Elena continued. I thought I had. You didn't, Mara said. Not accusation. Confirmation. Elena closed her eyes. I see it now. That doesn't fix it? Mara replied. No, Elena agreed. But it changes what I do next. Mara waited. I'm done pretending this was isolated, Elena said. This wasn't corruption. It was grooming. Mara's breath slowed. Yes, she said, it was. Another pause. They use my reputation to normalize disappearance, Elena continued. And I let them. You didn't know the endgame, Mara said. No, Elena replied. But I ignored the cost. Silence, stretched. Are you still in? Mara asked. Elena didn't hesitate. Yes. That was not courage. That was consequence. They ended the call without plans, without comfort. They didn't need either. Something had shifted permanently. Elena Cross was no longer protecting the system that shaped her. She was turning to face it. And somewhere, deep inside the network, someone realized that the detective who never left cases unfinished had finally reopened the one that mattered. Mara didn't leave the system in a single moment. People like to imagine it that way. One bad case, one corrupt superior, one dramatic resignation. A clean break made it easier to file away, easier to explain at dinner parties and in courtrooms. The truth was slower. The truth was a series of small compromises that accumulated like dust until breathing became difficult. Mara learned early that survival inside institutions depended on obedience disguised as professionalism. You followed procedure. You respected hierarchy. You trusted that someone above you knew more than you did. She tried. God, she tried. The first time she noticed something wrong, it was minor. A witness statement quietly downgraded. A timeline adjusted to better reflect the facts. A phrase softened so it sounded less like fear and more like confusion. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just convenient. Mara had flagged it, asked a question, received a look that said this is not how things work. She learned to listen. The second time, a woman disappeared. Not vanished, disappeared administratively. Her case file still existed. It just no longer led anywhere. No active investigation, no escalation. No follow-up. Mara had pushed harder that time. She was younger then. Still believed insistence was a virtue. The answer she'd received wasn't cruel. That was what made it dangerous. Sometimes, her supervisor had said, you don't help people by keeping them visible. Mara remembered standing there nodding, writing the explanation down like it made sense. It didn't, but she didn't walk away. Not yet. The third time, she almost became the problem. She'd stepped into something she wasn't meant to see, an interdepartmental memo that contradicted a public narrative. She'd saved a copy without thinking. 2 days later, she was called in. The meeting was calm, professional. 3 people. One of them familiar. One of them smiling too easily. They didn't threaten her. They reframed her. "You're asking the right questions," they'd said. "You just don't have the full picture yet. Let us protect you from information that could compromise your effectiveness." Protect, that word again. Mara remembered the moment clearly. The subtle tightening in her chest. The realization that the conversation wasn't about facts. It was about containment. She hadn't quit that day. She went home, slept, showed up the next morning. She stayed because leaving felt like surrender. She stayed because she believed pressure was temporary. She stayed because she told herself she could do more good inside than outside. That was the lie that finally broke her. The file that ended everything wasn't dramatic. No blood. No media. No urgency. Just a woman who had asked the wrong question in the wrong place. The woman wasn't guilty of anything. She was inconvenient. Mara had read the memo twice. Then a third time. Then she'd realized her own name appeared on the approval chain. Not as a decision maker. As a witness. That was how they did it. They didn't ask you to erase someone. They asked you to stand there while it happened. Mara had left the building that day without saying goodbye. She hadn't filed paperwork. She hadn't made a scene. She'd simply stopped participating. That was what leaving actually cost. Not safety. Identity. Mara became unclassifiable overnight. No badge. No protection. No institutional memory willing to claim her. She slept in her car for months. Learned which places noticed and which didn't. Learned how to ask for help without creating dependency. She learned that people trusted you more when you didn't represent anything but yourself. She learned that truth traveled faster outside structures designed to slow it down. And she learned that once you saw the pattern, you couldn't unsee it. Elena Cross had stayed. Mara didn't resent her for that. Not anymore. Everyone survived differently. But survival didn't absolve consequence. The call from Elena came late, when Mara was parked on a ridge overlooking the city, watching lights blink like coded signals. "I understand now," Elena said without preamble. Mara didn't answer immediately. Understanding was easy to claim in the quiet after revelation. "What do you understand?" Mara asked finally. "That I wasn't neutral," Elena replied. "That my reputation became cover." "Yes," Mara said. "And that I told myself I was preventing chaos," Elena continued. "When really, I was choosing which chaos was acceptable." Mara exhaled slowly. "That's closer." Silence stretched. "I don't expect absolution," Elena said. "Good," Mara replied. "You won't get it." Elena absorbed that without protest. "What I want," Elena said, "is to stop it." "That's not the same thing," Mara said. "No," Elena agreed. "But it's the only thing left." Mara watched the city for a long moment before speaking again. "You're not wrong for staying," she said. "But you're wrong if you think seeing it now makes it right." "I know," Elena said quietly. "Then we're clear." They didn't talk about strategy. They didn't need to. The shift had already happened. Elena was no longer a gatekeeper. She was a fracture. Mara moved again before sunrise. She approached the building she'd been watching from a different angle. Closer this time. She didn't cross the perimeter. She didn't need to. She noted guard rotations, shift changes, lighting inconsistencies. She noticed something else too. A second van, this one newer. Government lease. That mattered. She took photos she wouldn't keep and memorized details she would. Elena spent the same hours triggering alarms she couldn't turn off. She filed formal requests for oversight. Requested cross-agency audits. Reopened 2 cases publicly, attaching her own name to the scrutiny. It was reckless. It was necessary. Her inbox flooded. Some messages were supportive. Some were furious. Some were silent, which was worse. Elena didn't respond to any of them. She let the system feel her weight. Mara returned to her car as the sun edged higher. Her phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number. "You're becoming difficult." She typed back without hesitation. So were they. No reply followed. Good. That afternoon, Elena was called into another meeting. This one was colder. "You're compromising decades of trust," someone said. Elena met their gaze evenly. "I'm restoring it." That's not your decision. It is now. You're not protected. Another voice warned. Elena nodded. Neither were they. That ended the meeting. By nightfall, both women felt the same thing pressing in from opposite sides. The network wasn't retreating. It was recalibrating, which meant the next move wouldn't be subtle. It would be personal. Mara stood on the edge of the city again, phone in hand, staring at the photo she still carried. The woman's eyes stared back, alive, waiting. Mara folded the photo carefully and slid it back into her coat. This ends soon, she murmured, not as a promise, as a decision. Mara had always known there were systems beneath systems. You didn't survive long outside institutions without learning how power layered itself, how legality wasn't a line but a series of permissions, each one quieter than the last. What she hadn't known, until now, was how organized disappearance could be when enough people agreed it was useful. She stood inside a condemned records warehouse on the edge of the city, breathing air that tasted like rust and paper decay. The place had been scheduled for demolition 3 times and spared each time for reasons no one could articulate anymore. That alone made it valuable. Mara moved between shelves slowly, flashlight angled low, illuminating labels that hadn't been updated in years. The records weren't police. They weren't medical either. They were transitional. That word appeared everywhere. Transitional housing, transitional custody, transitional services. No beginning, no end, just movement. She pulled a box from a shelf and opened it. Inside were intake forms. Not names. Designations. Subjects classified by risk profile, not threat level. Risk to whom wasn't specified. Mara flipped page after page, heart slowing instead of racing. Panic made you sloppy. Recognition made you precise. These people hadn't vanished. They'd been rerouted. Across the city, Elena Cross sat in a glass-walled conference room she hadn't been invited into. She'd invited herself. The faces around the table were careful now, professional, distant in a way that felt newly defensive. Elena placed a folder in the center of the table and slid it forward. "I want to know who authorized these transfers," she said evenly. A man at the far end adjusted his glasses. "These are interagency matters." "No," Elena replied. "They're human beings." Silence. "That classification hasn't been used in years," another voice said. Elena leaned back. "Then why are the protocols still active?" No one answered. She pressed. "How many?" A pause. "Roughly," the man said. 200. Elena felt something inside her go very still. 200 what? She asked. The man hesitated. Subjects. Elena closed her eyes. That word again. Mara found the first map taped to the inside of a locker door. Hand-drawn, annotated, updated. Dots connected by arrows. Buildings that used to be hospitals. Shelters that had lost funding. Training centers shut down for renovation and never reopened. The network wasn't centralized. It was distributed. That was why it survived. You couldn't raid a ghost. You had to collapse its logic. Mara photographed nothing. She didn't need proof yet. She needed understanding. Elena's meeting ended without resolution. That told her everything. When people who usually talked refused to clarify, it meant she'd crossed into protected territory. She returned to her office and shut the door, heart pounding harder now, not from fear, but from clarity. She opened a private drive she'd never used before and began compiling. Mara found the ledger last. It wasn't digital, it was bound. Pages worn from handling, margins dense with shorthand. Inventory. Not of people, of outcomes. Transferred. Stabilized. Neutralized. Mara swallowed. This wasn't about protection. This was about containment of liability. People who complicated stories. People whose testimony threatened consensus. People whose existence demanded accountability. They weren't criminals. They were inconvenient truths. Elena Cross referenced 3 databases that weren't meant to talk to each other. Mental health holds. Temporary protective custody. Emergency relocations. Alone, they were defensible. Together, they were damning. She saw the pattern immediately. Subjects flagged at the local level. Escalated quietly. Removed from jurisdiction. Reclassified. Elena felt sick. She'd signed off on dozens of those escalations. Not knowing the destination, but knowing they'd never come back. Mara sat on the warehouse floor and let the weight of it settle. The missing woman wasn't unique. She was representative, one node in a network designed to absorb human unpredictability. And somewhere inside that network, people had convinced themselves this was mercy. Mara stood. She didn't have time for despair. She had time for action. Elena's phone rang. She didn't answer. Then it rang again. "Unknown number," she answered. "You've made yourself a problem," a voice said calmly. Elena didn't respond. "We can still resolve this," the voice continued. "You understand what happens when systems are destabilized?" "Yes," Elena said. "People become visible." A pause. "That's not how we frame it." "I know," Elena replied. "That's the issue." The call ended. Elena stared at the phone. Then she smiled, grim and unyielding. Mara left the warehouse as dawn broke. She burned the route from memory the moment she stepped outside. She didn't need the location anymore. She needed the story it told. Her phone vibrated. A message from Elena. "It's bigger than we thought." Mara typed back. "It always is." Another message. 200. Mara closed her eyes briefly. "Inventory," she replied. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "Yes," Elena wrote. They didn't need to. They were already synchronized now. Elena began filing formal demands that would ripple outward. Requests that couldn't be ignored without creating records. Mara began reaching out to people who'd survived the edges. Those released quietly, those who'd slipped through cracks and learned how close they'd come to vanishing. Stories surfaced. Fragments. Enough to confirm what the ledger implied. That night, the network moved defensively. Servers went dark. Facilities shifted staff. 2 containment sites were cleared entirely. Mara watched one evacuation from a distance, counting vehicles, memorizing timing. Elena watched internal dashboards light up with anomalies that had never been tracked together before. They were scrambling. That was good. But scrambling made people dangerous. Mara received another message. This one included a photo. The missing woman again. This time, closer. A hand visible in the frame. Bruised. The message was short. "You're accelerating consequences." Mara typed back. "So are you." She didn't send it immediately. She added one more line. "Release her." The reply came seconds later. Not without assurances. Mara smiled. They were negotiating now, which meant the network was no longer confident. Elena sat alone in her office, lights off, watching the city reflect in the glass. She understood now why these systems lasted. They didn't need villains. They needed professionals who believed harm could be optimized. She had been one of them. Not anymore. Somewhere underground, a woman who officially didn't exist listened to unfamiliar sounds, movement, raised voices, urgency. Something was changing. She didn't know why. She only knew she was still alive. Mara stood at the edge of the city once more, phone in hand, eyes steady. "This ends," she said aloud. Not soon, not cleanly, but decisive. Elena Cross had always trusted patterns more than people. People lied. They shifted. They justified. Patterns didn't. Patterns only revealed what was already there, waiting to be seen. That trust had kept her alive inside the system longer than most. It didn't save her now. The first sign wasn't dramatic, it was procedural. Her access request was denied, not flagged, not questioned, just denied, cleanly, quietly, like a door closing without a sound. Elena stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. She tried again. Same result. That was new. She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing, and let the implications line up. Access didn't disappear unless someone wanted you slowed down, or watched. She stood, slipped her jacket on, and walked out of her office without signing out. If the building was already compromised, leaving a trail didn't matter. Mara noticed the shift before Elena ever said a word. It was in the calls that didn't go through. The contacts who suddenly used formal language. The way certain streets felt heavier, as if attention had pooled there. She didn't assume betrayal. She assumed reallocation. When systems felt threatened, they didn't lash out immediately. They reassigned responsibility. Elena's second meeting of the day wasn't optional. She was summoned, not invited. A conference room she didn't usually use. No windows, no clock. 3 people again. Different faces this time. That mattered more than she wanted it to. "We're concerned about your objectivity," one of them said. Elena didn't sit. You're concerned about my visibility. That's not appropriate. It's accurate. Another voice cut in. You've reopened cases that were resolved under lawful authority. Authority doesn't make something lawful. Elena replied. It just makes it survivable. A pause. Then the line she'd been waiting for. You're too close to this. Elena nodded slowly. That's the first honest thing anyone said to me. The air shifted. You're being reassigned, the same voice continued. Effective immediately. To where? Administrative review. Elena almost laughed. Paperwork purgatory. No access. No influence. No noise. Containment. I assume this comes with restrictions, Elena said. Yes. Surveillance. The silence answered for them. Mara received Elena's message 15 minutes later. They moved. 2 words. Enough. Mara typed back. How hard? The reply came slower this time. Internally. Quietly. Mara closed her eyes briefly. Quiet moves were always the most dangerous. Elena didn't return to her office. She knew better. Instead, she walked the long way out, past departments she'd once commanded without raising her voice. No one stopped her. That was worse than being challenged. It meant she was already classified. She reached her car and didn't start it immediately. She checked the mirrors, then the undercarriage, then the back seat. Nothing. Again, that didn't mean safety. It meant observation. Mara changed locations twice before nightfall. She didn't want Elena followed to her. She didn't want herself predictable enough to be useful. She sat in a borrowed apartment she'd used once before. Empty, unfurnished, clean enough to pass. She laid out everything she knew. 200 people. Distributed sites. Internal consensus. External enforcement. And now, containment of Elena Cross. That was a mistake. Mara smiled faintly. They'd underestimated what betrayal did to someone who trusted patterns. Elena arrived home to find her door unlocked. She froze in the hallway. The apartment looked untouched at first glance. That was the point. She didn't step inside. She stood still and listened. The refrigerator hummed. The building creaked. A siren passed somewhere distant. No movement. Still, Elena didn't cross the threshold. She knew this trick. If someone wanted to scare you, they made a mess. If they wanted to warn you, they left things exactly where you'd left them, except for one detail she scanned. Then she saw it. Her notebook. Not missing. Relocated. Moved from the kitchen table to the couch. Open. A page turned. A line underlined. External custody. Elena exhaled slowly and stepped inside, locking the door behind her. So they weren't hiding anymore. They were negotiating dominance. Her phone rang. The number wasn't blocked. She answered. You're putting yourself at risk. A familiar voice said. Not from the meeting, from her own department. A colleague, a friend. You already did that for me, Elena replied. A pause. This doesn't have to get ugly. It already is. You're being monitored, the voice said. I'm trying to help. But telling me what I already know. But telling you when to stop. Elena closed her eyes. Who authorized it? She asked quietly. Silence. That was confirmation enough. She ended the call. Mara received another message. They're inside. She didn't ask where. She didn't ask how. She typed back. Then we accelerate. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then, agreed. That was the moment. Not when they aligned goals. When Elena stopped trying to preserve her place in the system. The next morning, Elena did something reckless. She filed a formal complaint. Not to internal affairs. To oversight. With documentation. With timestamps. With her name attached. It was a declaration. If they wanted to stop her now, they'd have to do it in daylight. That made things messy. Mara grinned when she saw the ripple effect. Phones lit up. Messages spiked. Facilities went on lockdown. Someone had miscalculated Elena Cross's breaking point. The retaliation came fast. A leak. Selective. A story framed as concern. Senior detective under review for compromised judgment. The implication was clear. Unstable. Emotional. Overinvested. Classic. Mara read the article twice, then forwarded it to Elena with one word. Predictable. Elena replied minutes later. Effective. Mara shook her head, smiling. They always use the same playbook, she murmured. That night, someone followed Elena openly. No subtlety. No deniability. She didn't confront them. She led them somewhere public, then doubled back through a parking structure and vanished. Old skills. Still sharp, she arrived at the rendezvous point 10 minutes late on purpose. Mara was already there. They didn't hug. They didn't smile. They stood across from each other in a closed subway station that smelled like rust and water. They burned me, Elena said. I know, Mara replied. They're framing it as concern. I know. They're watching everything. I know. Elena let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. They think isolation will stop me. Mara met her gaze steadily. It won't, she said, but it will clarify things. Elena nodded. I don't have institutional protection anymore. You never did, Mara said gently. You had permission. That landed. Elena straightened. Then I'm done asking. They stood there in silence, two women now fully exposed to a system that no longer pretended neutrality. Inside the badge, loyalty had become surveillance. Outside it, survival had become strategy. And somewhere in the network, someone realized too late that betraying Elena Cross hadn't silenced her. It had freed her. Mara vanished before dawn. Not dramatically. Not with urgency. She didn't leave messages or create a narrative that could be traced backward. She simply stopped existing in ways that were legible. No phone. No vehicle tied to her. No patterns that belonged to the last version of herself. She moved through the city like someone who'd already died once and learned what not to carry into the afterlife. The survivor lived at the edge of the map. Not figuratively, literally. A place that used to be a town and now existed only as zoning language. A stretch of road no one maintained because no one admitted responsibility for it anymore. Mara reached it on foot after abandoning the last vehicle 2 miles out. She didn't rush. Rushing meant noise. She approached the trailer slowly, counting steps, listening to the way sound traveled in open spaces. Wind. Distant machinery. A dog barking far enough away to be irrelevant. The porch light was off. That didn't mean anything. She knocked once. Then waited. Nothing. She knocked again, 3 quick taps, then 1 slow. The door opened an inch. An eye appeared in the gap. Who sent you? A voice whispered. No one, Mara replied. That's why I'm here. The door opened another inch. Mara caught a glimpse of fear sharpened into discipline. Good. Fear kept you alive inside. The air smelled like antiseptic and old paper. The woman, late 30s, maybe older, stood with her back to the wall, a knife in her hand. She didn't lower it. They told me you wouldn't come, the woman said. They say a lot of things, Mara replied. You're alone. Wes. The woman laughed once, brittle. That's what scares me. Mara nodded. That's fair. They stood there for a long moment, measuring. I'm not here to extract you, Mara said finally. Not yet. The woman's grip tightened. Then why risk this? Because they think you're forgotten, Mara said, and I need you to know you're not. That landed. The knife lowered slightly. Across the city, Elena Cross stood in front of a terminal she no longer had authorization to use. The login screen blinked back at her. She typed anyway. Username. Password. Need? She didn't try again. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim drive she'd kept for emergencies she'd never named. She'd plugged it in. The screen flickered. Then opened. Elena exhaled. This was illegal. Not a gray area. Not procedural drift. A line crossed with intention. She began copying files. Mara listened more than she spoke. The survivor, Lena, she finally offered. Talked in fragments at first. Half stories. Checks for reaction. Mara didn't interrupt. They'd moved us, Lena said. Not together. Never together. They said it was for our safety. Did it feel safe? Mara asked. Lena laughed quietly. No. Did you ever leave? Mara pressed. Once. Lena said. They let me? I think they wanted to see if I'd try to run. Did you? Yes. And they brought me back, smiling. Mara's jaw tightened. They hurt you? Yes. Did they threaten you? No. Lena replied. They explained. That word again. Mara felt something cold settle. Explained what? She asked. That if I talked, Lena said, I wouldn't be the one who paid. Mara nodded. Of course. Elena worked quickly. She pulled audit logs, access records, movement histories, anything that showed who had touched what and when. She didn't search by name. She searched by absence, where records skipped, where timestamps clustered unnaturally, where approval chains terminated early. She found it, a directive embedded inside a budget adjustment. Facilities reclassified as non-residential. Elena stared at the screen. That was how they did it. If no one lived there, no one could be held there. She copied everything. Then something unexpected happened. An alert, unauthorized activity detected. Elena's pulse spiked. She didn't panic. She yanked the drive free, killed the terminal, and stepped back just as the door to the office opened. A uniformed officer froze in the doorway. "Elena?" he said. She met his gaze calmly. "You shouldn't be here." He swallowed. "Neither should you." They stood there, years of shared context hanging between them. "I didn't see anything," he said finally. Elena nodded once. "Thank you." He left without another word. That, more than anything, told her how fractured things had become. Mara stood as Lena spoke, pacing the small trailer, mapping exits, checking windows. "You're still here because they think you're useful," Mara said. "Useful how?" "A's leverage," Mara replied. "As proof they can make people disappear without killing them." Lena's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know." "Then why me?" Mara stopped pacing and met her gaze. "Because you saw something they couldn't afford to explain away," she said. "And because you didn't scare easily enough to discredit." Lena laughed weakly. "Story of my life." Mara reached into her coat and placed the photo on the table. Lena stared at it. "That's her?" she whispered.
"Yes. She's alive."
"Less." Lena closed her eyes. "They said she wouldn't last," she said. Mara's voice hardened. They were wrong. Elena left the building knowing cameras had recorded her. That was fine. If the system wanted a timeline, she'd give them one. She drove without headlights until she reached a tunnel, then pulled over and powered the car down. She checked her phone. One message from Mara, off-grid. "I need time." Elena typed back, "I bought you some." She added, "They're on to me." Mara replied seconds later, "Good." Elena smiled grimly. Mara prepared Lena for the next phase without promising safety. "Promises got people killed. You may have to move," Mara said. "Soon." "I'm tired of moving," Lena replied. "I know. They'll find me." "Yes." Lena met her gaze. "Then what's the point?" "The point," Mara said gently, "is that when they come, they won't be the only ones watching." Lena swallowed. "That's all I can offer." "That's enough," Lena said after a long pause. Mara left before sunrise. She didn't hug Lena. She didn't give her contact information. She left instructions written in code that only made sense if you were already paying attention. If Lena survived, she'd understand them. If she didn't, no instructions would have mattered. Elena received the first formal notice just after noon. Suspension pending review. She read it once, then deleted it. She forwarded the copied files to 3 locations she trusted. People who wouldn't act yet, but would remember when it mattered. She then did the most dangerous thing of all. She called her superior. "This ends now," Elena said. A pause. "You're not in a position to." "I have copies," Elena interrupted. "And a timeline." Another pause. Longer. "You don't know how deep this goes." "I do," Elena replied. "And I'm done pretending depth equals legitimacy." The call ended without resolution. That was fine. Resolution was no longer the goal. That night, Mara returned to the city under cover of a storm. She felt the pressure close in immediately. Cars where they hadn't been before. Eyes that lingered too long. They were done negotiating. So was she. She checked her phone. A single message from Elena. "I crossed the line." Mara typed back, "So did I." They didn't elaborate. They didn't need to. Somewhere in the city, someone made a decision. Not to scare, not to warn, to remove. And for the first time since this began, Mara and Elena both felt it at the same moment. The air tightening. The system choosing violence. The first mistake the network made was assuming fear erased memory. Fear didn't erase anything. It sharpened it. Lena hadn't slept since Mara left. Not because she was panicking, Panic wasted energy. But because something inside her had finally shifted, the lie she'd been living under had cracked, and the truth leaked in everywhere. Through the walls, through the floor, through the pauses between sounds. She sat at the small table in the trailer, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold hours ago, staring at the paper Mara had left behind. It wasn't instructions. It was permission. Permission to remember. Lena began with the details she'd trained herself to forget. The intake room, white walls, no windows. A man who smiled like he was apologizing for something he planned to do anyway. He'd never raised his voice. That was the part she remembered most clearly. They never shouted. They explained. They explained that she wasn't in trouble. They explained that she'd seen something complicated. They explained that complexity had consequences. They explained that silence was protection. They explained that protection required cooperation. Lena closed her eyes and breathed through the memory until it stopped clawing. Then she picked up the phone. Mara felt it before she saw it. The shift. It moved through the city like pressure through a sealed room. Phones lighting up, cars repositioning, conversations ending mid-sentence. Someone had spoken. She parked beneath an elevated rail line and watched rainwater drip from rusted steel, counting seconds between drops. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She answered without greeting. "I'm ready," Lena said. Mara closed her eyes. "Are you safe?" she asked. "No," Lena replied. "But I never was." Mara nodded even though Lena couldn't see it. "Then start where it hurts least," Mara said. "We'll build from there." Elena Cross was in the middle of another meeting when her secure line vibrated. She didn't excuse herself. She stood. "Pause," she said, voice flat. 3 sets of eyes tracked her as she stepped into the hallway and answered. "She's talking," Mara said. Elena leaned against the wall. "Publicly. Not yet. When? Soon." Elena closed her eyes briefly. "Then they'll move." "They already are," Mara replied. Elena exhaled. "I'll slow them." "How?" "How?" "By becoming the loudest problem in the room." "You're good at that." Lena didn't give a statement. She told a story. She recorded it in one continuous take. No edits, no corrections, no performance. Her voice shook in places, went flat in others. She didn't apologize for either. She named the buildings. She named the procedures. She described the moment she realized no one was coming to rescue her. "I wasn't missing," she said into the camera. "I was stored." That sentence changed everything. Elena received the file through a channel she didn't know still worked. She watched it once. Then again. By the third viewing, she wasn't watching as a detective. She was watching as someone implicated. Not accused. Implicated. She recognized the phrasing Lena quoted. She'd heard it before, used it. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. She forwarded the video to oversight, then to legal, then to a journalist who owed her a favor and knew when to wait. She attached no commentary. She let the truth speak. Mara moved Lena before the video went live. No discussion, no debate. She showed up at the trailer in the dark, headlights off, engine still warm. Lena was ready. They didn't speak until they were miles away. "Are you afraid?" Mara asked finally. "Yes," Lena said. "But not of them." Mara nodded. "Good." The video dropped at noon, not on a major platform, not with headlines. It surfaced quietly, shared first among people who knew what to look for. Then it spread, slow at first, then all at once. The language was careful, the details precise, the implications unavoidable. The network's first response was denial. Their second was silence. Their third was containment. That was where they failed. Elena was called into a room with no windows and too many people. They didn't accuse her. They didn't need to. "You facilitated this," someone said. Elena didn't deny it. "I allowed the truth to be heard," she replied. "That truth is destabilizing," another voice said. "Yes," Elena agreed. "That's what happens when lies end." They tried reason. They tried warning. They tried reminding her of consequences. Elena listened. Then she stood. "You trained me to close cases," she said. "You never trained me to silence people." The room went still. She left without being stopped. Mara watched the fallout from a distance. Facilities shut down. Contracts frozen. Names scrubbed from websites too quickly. Panic masquerading as efficiency. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You've made this worse." Mara typed back, "No, I made it visible." The reply didn't come. Lena slept for the first time in weeks that night. Not deeply, not peacefully, but without the sense of waiting for footsteps that mattered. Elena returned home to find reporters in the lobby. She didn't stop. She didn't answer questions. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Inside her apartment, she poured herself a drink she didn't finish and stared out the window at a city that suddenly looked different. More fragile. More honest. Her phone buzzed. "Mara." She told the truth. Mara said, "Yes." Elena replied, and it didn't break her. "No." Elena said softly. It broke the story they'd built around her. Mara paused. "This is where it gets dangerous." Elena nodded, even though Mara couldn't see it. "Yes," she said, "because now they can't pretend this is theoretical." By morning, 3 officials had resigned. By afternoon, 2 containment sites were under investigation. By evening, the network had stopped moving. Not because it was finished, but because it was wounded. Wounded systems were unpredictable. That was the danger. Mara sat with Lena in a borrowed room, listening to the city outside. "They'll come," Lena said quietly. "Yes," Mara replied. "For you too." "Less." Lena swallowed. "Then why do you stay?" Mara considered the question. "Because if I don't," she said, "they win by default." Lena nodded. That made sense. Elena spent the night answering questions no one had ever dared ask her before. She didn't deflect. She didn't minimize. She didn't protect her legacy. She let it fracture. Because fractured truth was still truth. Somewhere deep inside the network, someone made another decision, not to explain, not to threaten, to remove the problem entirely. This time not quietly. Mara felt it in her bones before the message arrived. Her phone buzzed. One word. "Enough." She stared at it. Then she smiled, slow and dangerous. "No," she whispered. Not as defiance. The system didn't collapse. That was the first lie people told themselves when the story broke. That exposure would cause some dramatic implosion. A chain reaction of arrests and apologies that would neatly resolve everything. Systems like this didn't collapse. They shed weight. They cut loose whatever threatened stability and kept moving. Elena Cross learned that lesson in real time. The internal investigation began before the press finished writing their headlines. It arrived in the form of an email marked mandatory compliance review, sent to her personal account and her professional one at the same time. That duplication wasn't accidental. It was a signal. You are no longer protected by silence. Elena read it once, then forwarded it to her lawyer without comment. She didn't feel panic. She felt recognition. This was what happened when you refused to disappear quietly. Mara felt the consequences differently. They came without paperwork. Her phone stopped working altogether, not dead, not disconnected, jammed, no signal, no recovery. She smashed it under her heel without hesitation and tossed the pieces into a storm drain. Within hours, her face appeared on internal bulletins she wasn't supposed to see. Not labeled criminal. Labeled volatile. That word again. Volatile meant unpredictable. Unpredictable meant dangerous to narrative. Mara smiled grimly. They were learning. Elena's name trended by noon, not with accusations. With doubt. Senior detective under review. Questions raised about judgment, whistleblower or liability. The framing was precise. They didn't call her corrupt. They suggested instability. That way, anything she said next could be dismissed as emotion instead of evidence. Elena watched one segment without sound, studying the anchor's expressions like she used to study suspects. She recognized the playbook. She turned the television off. The first subpoena arrived before lunch. The second arrived before dinner. By nightfall, Elena had 3 different agencies. Same language. Scope creep disguised as diligence. She lined them up on her kitchen table, poured herself coffee she didn't drink, and began highlighting. They wanted her timeline. They wanted her communications. They wanted to know when her objectivity shifted. Elena smiled faintly. It hadn't shifted. It had finally aligned. Mara relocated twice that day. She didn't pack. She didn't leave traces. She moved like someone who understood that visibility was now a weapon being aimed both ways. Cars followed her openly now. No subtlety. No attempt to deny it. That meant the watchers wanted her to know. Intimidation stage. Mara welcomed it. Fear worked best on people who still had something to lose. Elena was suspended that evening. No ceremony, no escort, just an automated message informing her that her access had been revoked pending review. She read it calmly, then shut the laptop. She had known this was coming. She hadn't expected how relieved she'd feel. For the first time in years, no one could order her to stop. The press camped outside her building by nightfall. Elena didn't address them. She walked past with her head up, keys in hand, eyes forward. Someone shouted her name. Someone else shouted a question. She didn't slow. Silence, when chosen, was still agency. Mara met Elena in person for the first time since the fallout began. Not at a safe house. Not underground. At a public park in the middle of the city, late at night, where surveillance cameras outnumbered trees. They sat on opposite ends of a bench, staring out at nothing. "They're burning you," Mara said quietly. Elena nodded. "Yes. They'll try to make it look like this ends with you." "I know." "Teh. They'll try to make me disappear." "Yes." They shared a look. Not fear, calculation. "Are you okay with that?" Mara asked. Elena considered the question carefully. "I'm not okay," she said. "But I'm clear." That was enough. The network's next move was surgical. 2 mid-level officials resigned. 1 facility director was arrested. The narrative shifted. Bad actors. Rogue decisions. Containment failure. The structure remained intact. Mara watched the press conference from a diner television, stirring coffee she didn't want. "Scapegoats," she muttered. Across town, Elena watched the same broadcast and nodded. "They're trimming branches," she said later. "Not cutting roots." Mara replied. "Then we keep digging." The survivor video reached its second wave. This one wasn't viral. It was influential. Advocacy groups. Oversight committees. Foreign journalists. Questions arrived that couldn't be buried with talking points. The network felt it, and it didn't like being questioned by people it couldn't intimidate. Elena's lawyer called just after midnight. "They're floating criminal charges," he said. "For what?" "Unauthorized access. Mishandling sensitive information. Potential endangerment." Elena laughed softly. "Of course. They'll offer a deal," he continued, "if you cooperate." Elena closed her eyes. "No," she said. A pause. "That will make things harder." "Yes," Elena replied. That's the point. Mara was nearly taken that night. Not by police. Not by the network. By someone working fast and sloppy, trying to impress the wrong people. A van pulled too close. A door slid open. Hands reached. Mara broke a wrist, kicked free, and vanished into a stairwell before the door closed again. She didn't chase. She didn't retaliate. That wasn't the move. That was desperation on their end. Desperation meant timing was working. Elena woke to find her bank accounts flagged. Not frozen. Flagged. Another signal. They wanted to remind her how expensive principal could be. She paid for groceries in cash and felt oddly lighter doing it. The internal investigation accelerated. Elena was called to testify, under oath, in a room full of people who had once deferred to her judgment. She answered every question. She didn't embellish. She didn't soften. She told the truth with the same precision she'd once used to close cases. When asked whether she regretted her actions, she paused. "No," she said. "I regret the years it took me to see them." That quote made the news. Mara listened to the audio recording later and smiled. "They can't unhear that," she said. No one replied. She was alone again. That was fine. By the end of the week, Elena's career was effectively over. No official statement. No verdict. Just an understanding. She wasn't welcome back. Mara's situation was less visible, but no less severe. Her name appeared in private memos. Her movements logged. Her presence treated like a hazard. 2 women, isolated in different ways, carrying the same weight. They spoke one last time that night. Not to plan. Not to comfort. To acknowledge reality. "They'll keep coming," Elena said. "Yes," Mara replied. "They'll never admit the full truth." "No. But they'll change," Elena said, "because they're afraid now." Mara considered that.
Yes,
She agreed. And fear makes systems sloppy. Silence followed. Whatever happens next, Elena said finally, thank you for not letting me stay blind. Mara didn't respond immediately. Whatever happens next, she said, thank you for choosing to see. The city slept uneasily that night. Facilities remained closed. Documents leaked quietly. And somewhere in the machinery of power, someone realized too late that consequences weren't a phase. They were a condition. The offer came the way all dangerous offers did, quietly, reasonably, wrapped in concern. Elena Cross received it through her lawyer, delivered with language polished smooth enough to sound benevolent. No charges, no prosecution, no further review. In exchange, she would sign a non-disclosure agreement, formally withdraw prior statements, and accept an administrative resolution citing procedural misalignment. But she would not be reinstated, but she would be protected. Elena read the document twice. Then a third time. The word protected appeared 6 times. The word truth did not appear at all. Mara heard about the offer before Elena did. That wasn't because Elena told her. It was because the system always tested both sides of a fracture. Mara's message arrived on a borrowed phone just after midnight. A way out still exists. Walk away and this ends. She stared at the screen for a long moment. They weren't threatening her. They were tempting her. That meant something had shifted. Elena sat at her kitchen table as dawn crept in, the offer spread neatly before her. She hadn't slept. She hadn't needed to. This was the moment she'd been moving toward since the first unfinished case. Whether she'd known it or not. Her lawyer's voice echoed in her head. This is the best possible outcome. You've already done enough damage. Think about your future. Elena thought about her past instead. The faces she hadn't looked for. The files she'd closed too cleanly. The comfort of believing competence was the same as righteousness. She picked up a pen. Then set it down. Mara moved through the city like a rumor. She didn't hide. She didn't confront. She let herself be seen just enough to remind the watchers she hadn't gone anywhere. They didn't approach her again. That mattered. If they wanted her compliant, they needed her unafraid. Fear made people reckless. Resignation made them useful. Elena called Mara at noon. Not on a secure line. Not with caution. They offered me silence. Elena said. Mara didn't respond immediately. What did they offer you? She asked. Immunity? Protection? Erasure of everything after the video? And before? They'll reframe it. Mara nodded. They always do. Elena exhaled. If I sign, this ends. Publicly. And privately. Elena closed her eyes. Privately, nothing changes. Silence stretched between them. You didn't call me for advice, Mara said finally. No, Elena admitted. I called because I need to say it out loud. Mara waited. They're not asking me to lie. Elena continued. They're asking me to forget. Mara's voice hardened. That's worse. Wes. Across the city, Lena watched the news from a borrowed couch in a borrowed apartment. She recognized the shift in tone immediately. Stories that had been sharp were now careful. Questions softened into speculation. Outrage redirected toward process instead of harm. She turned the television off. They're trying to end it, she said quietly. Mara nodded. They are. Lena swallowed. Will it work? Amara met her gaze. That depends on choices other people haven't made yet. Elena stood in front of a mirror that afternoon and studied her own reflection. She looked older than she remembered, not from stress. From honesty. She imagined signing the document. Imagined the relief, the quiet, the way the world would stop demanding answers from her. She imagined waking up months later, knowing exactly what she'd traded. Her name for silence, her conscience for safety. She looked away. The network's pressure intensified as the day wore on. Mara's access to cash evaporated. 2 of her contacts vanished overnight. A familiar car appeared outside Lena's building and didn't leave. This wasn't coincidence. This was leverage. Mara didn't flinch. She adjusted. Elena's lawyer called again. They're getting nervous, he said. That's good for you. It's good for them, Elena replied. Be realistic. I am. You're choosing martyrdom. Elena smiled faintly. No, I'm choosing continuity. He didn't understand that. She didn't try to explain. Mara moved Lena again that evening. Not because she had to. Because she could. Movement reminded people they weren't trapped. As they drove, Lena stared out the window. Do you ever wonder, she asked quietly, what would have happened if you'd walked away? Mara considered the question. Yes, she said. I wonder who would have disappeared instead. Lena nodded. That answered it. Elena signed nothing. Instead, she did something irreversible. She uploaded her full timeline. Not selectively. Not careful completely. Dates, names, decisions. Her own role. She attached no commentary. She didn't frame herself as hero or villain. She framed herself as a witness. The file went to oversight to the press and to an international watchdog that didn't care about domestic discomfort. Once sent, it could not be recalled. Elena sat back in her chair and closed her eyes. That was the moment her career truly ended. And something else began. Mara felt the impact immediately. Phones rang. Cars moved. People panicked. The system had been forced to choose between protecting itself and containing the truth. It couldn't do both anymore. She checked her phone. One message from Elena. I chose. Mara replied with one word. Good. The retaliation was swift. A warrant request surfaced. Thin, aggressive, designed to justify detention without charges. Mara read it and laughed softly. They're scrambling, she said. Lena didn't smile. They're dangerous. Yes, Mara agreed. But they're exposed now. Elena was called into custody that night. Not arrested, detained for questioning. She went willingly. She brought no lawyer. She didn't resist. The officers were professional, uncomfortable. They knew. Inside the interview room, Elena sat straight, backed and calm. She answered every question. When asked why she'd released the information, she didn't hesitate. Because truth that depends on permission isn't truth, she said. The recording cut there. Someone stopped it. Too late. Mara waited. She didn't intervene. Not yet. Intervention came after consequence. That was how you change trajectories instead of creating martyrs. By morning, the fallout was global. International outlets picked up the story. Advocacy groups demanded accountability. Funding partners froze contracts. The network had lost control of the narrative. That was the real defeat. Elena was released without charges at dawn. No apology, no explanation, just a quiet understanding. She walked out into the early light alone, coat over her arm, breath fogging in the cold. Her phone buzzed. Mara. You okay? Mara asked. Yes, Elena replied. That surprised her. What now? Mara asked. Elena looked at the sky, pale and honest. Now, she said, I live with it. Mara smiled faintly. That's the only real option. Somewhere inside the system, the offer was quietly withdrawn. There would be no more deals. The choice had been made, by both sides. And from this point forward, the story would not be about closure. It would be about consequences that couldn't be negotiated away. Justice didn't arrive with sirens. It arrived with paperwork. That was the part most people didn't understand. They expected trials, confessions, public reckonings that wrapped pain into digestible conclusions. But justice, when it came this late, moved differently. It moved like erosion. Slow, patient, impossible to stop once it began. Mara watched it happen from the margins. She stood outside a courthouse she had no intention of entering, coffee cooling in her hands as people moved in and out with the urgency of those who believed process still guaranteed meaning. She didn't need to be inside. The signs were already visible. A prosecutor she recognized avoided eye contact. A consultant left through a side door instead of the front. A familiar name was missing from a docket it had occupied for years. Quiet justice. It didn't announce itself. It withdrew protection. Elena Cross experienced it differently. For her, justice arrived in the form of absence. No calls, no instructions, no one telling her what to do next. She woke in her apartment on the second day after her release and sat at the edge of the bed, disoriented by the unfamiliar weight of choice. For years, her days had been structured by obligation. Cases, deadlines, expectations that arrived before thought. Now there was nothing. She made coffee and drank it standing at the counter, staring out the window at a city that hadn't changed just because she had. Her phone buzzed once. Not a warning. A notification. 3 more facilities had been shuttered overnight. No explanation offered. None required. The dismantling didn't happen all at once. It couldn't. The network had been designed to survive attention. It was modular, resilient, adaptable. When one node failed, others absorbed the load. But what it hadn't been designed to survive was memory. Names resurfaced. Files were reopened. Questions were asked by people with no incentive to stop asking. The ledger Mara had found, now copied, cross-referenced, and anonymized, made its way into hands that understood what it represented. Inventory became evidence. Lena watched the updates from a borrowed room with the curtains half drawn. She didn't celebrate. Celebration implied an ending. This didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a long exhale that hadn't finished leaving her body yet. "They closed the one in New Jersey," she said quietly. Mara nodded from across the room. "They didn't announce it." "They never do." Lena swallowed. "Does that mean?" "It means no one else goes there," Mara said. "Not today." Lena nodded. That was enough for now. Elena met with an oversight investigator 3 days later. Not in an office. In a cafe that smelled like burnt espresso and stale pastries. The investigator didn't take notes. She didn't need to. Elena wasn't there to convince anyone anymore. "I don't want assurances," Elena said. "I want timelines." The investigator studied her carefully. "You're not in a position to make demands." Elena nodded. "I know. I'm in a position to remember." That changed the tone. They spoke for an hour. Names were exchanged. Patterns confirmed. Assumptions dismantled. No promises were made. That was honest. Mara stayed mobile. Not because she had to. Because movement kept her from mistaking progress for safety. She visited places that no longer existed on maps. Former clinics, abandoned shelters, office parks that had been repurposed and forgotten. She didn't trespass. She didn't collect proof. She listened. People talked when they believed the danger had passed. That was when truth slipped out. Justice in this phase didn't look like punishment. It looked like consequence. Contracts dissolved quietly. Funding streams evaporated. Careers stalled without explanation. Some people walked away untouched. Others lost everything and never understood why. That bothered Elena more than she expected. "Is this enough?" she asked Mara one evening as they sat on opposite sides of a public library steps, the city moving around them. "No," Mara replied. "But it's real." Elena nodded. "I keep waiting for it to feel fair." Mara met her gaze. "Fair is for stories that start clean." That landed. The first woman was released a week later. Not Lena. Another. A name Elena recognized from a file she'd once signed. The release wasn't announced. The woman was simply returned. Dropped at a transit hub with a new ID and a voucher for temporary housing. No apology, no explanation. But alive. Elena stared at the confirmation email for a long time. Then she closed her laptop and pressed her palms flat against the table. "That's one," she whispered. Lena didn't want to watch anymore. She turned off her phone and sat on the floor, back against the couch, breathing slowly until the tightness in her chest eased. "I don't want them to be the only thing I remember," she said. Mara nodded. "They won't be." "How do you know?" "Because memory isn't owned by what hurt you," Mara replied. "It's owned by what you choose to carry forward." Lena absorbed that. She didn't reply, but later she slept without nightmares. That mattered. Elena began writing. Not reports, not statements. A record. She documented how the system trained compliance. How language was used to soften harm. How competence became a shield for cruelty. She didn't publish it. Not yet. This wasn't for exposure. This was for prevention. If the network reassembled, and it would, somewhere, someday, there needed to be a manual for recognizing it. Elena had helped build the first one. She would help dismantle the next. Mara watched a final facility close from a distance. The building stood empty, lights off, signage removed. No press. No protest. Just absence. She felt no triumph. Only a sober satisfaction that something had ended because enough people had refused to look away. Her phone buzzed. "Elena?" "They're done here," Elena said. Mara exhaled slowly. "Hair isn't everywhere." "I know, but it's a start." "Yes," Elena agreed. "It is. Justice continued quietly. Files reopened. Lives entered public record. Disappearances corrected one by one. No parade followed. No one thanked Mara. Elena received a single letter from a woman whose name she hadn't known she remembered. It said only you looked back. Elena held the letter for a long time. That night, the city felt almost peaceful. Not because everything was right, but because something profoundly wrong had been interrupted. Mara stood at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, feeling the familiar pull of movement. Elena stood at her window, watching the same city from above, no longer responsible for its order, but deeply invested in its honesty. Lena lay on a borrowed bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining a future that didn't require hiding. 3 women, different paths, one quiet form of justice. And for the first time since this began, no one was being erased. The hardest part wasn't losing the badge. Elena Cross had expected that. She'd prepared herself for the silence, for the way doors would stop opening automatically, for the subtle recalibration of how people spoke to her once authority was no longer implied. She had known, intellectually, that identity built on function didn't survive function's removal. What she hadn't anticipated was how much space would be left behind. Empty hours, unclaimed mornings, decisions that didn't arrive pre-structured. She woke before dawn out of habit, brewed coffee she drank slowly now, and stood at her window watching the city wake up without her involvement. For the first time in 14 years, there were crimes happening she wasn't responsible for noticing. That truth landed unevenly. Relief and grief were not opposites. They shared the same nervous system. Mara noticed the shift in Elena before Elena spoke about it. It was in the cadence of her messages, slower, less tactical. Fewer assessments, more observations. The absence of urgency didn't mean apathy. It meant recalibration. Mara understood that instinctively. She'd gone through it once herself. The days after you stop running feel heavier than the days you're hunted. There's no adrenaline to keep the questions at bay. No external threat to organize your thoughts around. Just you, and the consequences you didn't get to outrun. Elena packed her office in a single afternoon. There wasn't much to take. She'd never decorated, never personalized. The space had always been functional, a place to think rather than belong. She placed her notebooks into a box last, fingers lingering on the worn edges. She considered destroying them. Then she didn't. Erasure had done enough damage already. She left the box with a friend who didn't ask questions and walked out of the building without looking back. No one stopped her. No one thanked her. That felt right. Mara didn't stay long enough for the city to decide how it felt about her. She never did. Cities liked clean narratives, heroes, villains, endings. Mara existed in the negative space between those categories, where things got done without ceremony and then disappeared again. She moved Lena one last time, not because Lena needed it, but because Mara did. Staying too close to someone you'd saved created a different kind of danger. The illusion that safety was transferable. It wasn't. "I'm going to be okay," Lena said at the door of the small apartment she'd chosen for herself. The choice mattered more than the location. "Mara believed her, I know," she said. They didn't hug. They didn't exchange promises. They nodded once to each other and went their separate ways. That was how you honored survival. Elena struggled most in the evenings. The nights were too quiet. No phone calls. No emergency alerts. No unfinished cases demanding attention. She tried reading. Couldn't focus. Tried watching television. Too many stories about resolution. Eventually, she started walking. She walked the neighborhoods she'd once patrolled from behind glass, noticing details she'd missed when movement was purposeful. Porch lights left on. Windows cracked open to let in night air. People talking loudly because they felt unobserved. It unsettled her, not because it was dangerous, because it was alive. Mara watched Elena from a distance she pretended not to maintain. Old habits. You didn't dismantle surveillance instincts overnight. She didn't interfere, didn't check in unnecessarily. She trusted Elena to find her own equilibrium, just as she'd once had to. Still, there was a moment, a particular night, when Mara almost broke that rule. Elena stood on a bridge overlooking the river, hands resting on the railing, posture too still. Mara watched from across the street, heart rate steady, mind alert. She didn't approach. She waited. After several minutes, Elena straightened, took a breath, and walked on. Mara exhaled. Good. The consequences continued in ways neither of them could fully track. A former administrator resigned to pursue other opportunities. A private contractor lost federal eligibility without explanation. A bill quietly stalled in committee and never resurfaced. No one used the word justice. They used words like restructuring and compliance realignment. Mara hated those words, but she understood their utility. Sometimes harm had to be dismantled in the same language that built it. Elena received her pension paperwork 3 weeks later. Reduced, delayed, conditional. She read it carefully, signed where required, and mailed it back without comment. She wasn't proud. She wasn't ashamed. She was done negotiating with a system that mistook obedience for virtue. The first time someone recognized her in public, it caught her off guard. A woman in a grocery store aisle paused, studying her face. "You're..." the woman began. Elena nodded once, neutral. "Thank you," the woman said quietly. "For what?" "For not pretending," the woman replied. Elena stood there long after the woman walked away, hands gripping the cart. She hadn't expected gratitude. She didn't know what to do with it. Mara felt the pull to leave grow stronger each day. Not from fear, from instinct. When things stabilized, when patterns settled into something resembling order, Mara knew it was time to move on. Her work existed in transition spaces. Staying once equilibrium returned risked becoming part of the structure. She packed lightly. She always did. Elena and Mara met one final time before Mara disappeared again. Not underground, not in secrecy. At a small diner just off the highway, mid-morning, sunlight cutting through the blinds in uneven stripes. They sat across from each other, mugs between them. "You're leaving," Elena said. "Yes." "Permanently?" Mara shrugged. "Nothing is permanent." Elena nodded. "I figured." They sat in companionable silence for a moment. "I don't know what I'm supposed to be now," Elena admitted. Mara studied her face carefully. "That's not a problem," she said. "That's freedom." Elena huffed a soft laugh. "It doesn't feel like it." "It will," Mara replied, "eventually. Or it won't. Either way, it'll be yours." That mattered. Elena hesitated, then asked the question she'd been holding back for weeks. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Leaving?" Mara considered. "No," she said finally. "I regret what staying would have required." Elena nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "That makes sense." Mara stood to leave first. She didn't offer contact information. She didn't need to. Some connections existed without maintenance. As she reached the door, Elena spoke again. "If this happens somewhere else," she said, "will you go?" Mara paused. "Yes," she replied. "If someone notices." Elena smiled faintly. "Then I'll keep noticing." That was the closest thing to a promise they exchanged. Mara drove out of the city before noon. No destination in mind. Just movement. The city receded in her mirrors, not as something conquered or abandoned, but as something interrupted. Harm slowed, not erased. That was enough. Elena returned home to an apartment that no longer felt temporary. She unpacked the last box she'd been avoiding. Inside were her notebooks. She placed them on a shelf, not hidden, not displayed. Present, she poured herself coffee and sat at the table, pen in hand. Not to write a case report. To write questions the system had taught her not to ask. That night, Elena slept through until morning for the first time since the beginning. No dreams. No alarms. Just rest. Somewhere on a highway, Mara drove with the windows down, air rushing in. The city already a story she would carry without retelling. And somewhere else, Lena woke in a place she'd chosen, opened the curtains, and stepped into a day that didn't require hiding. Aftermath didn't look like victory. It looked like people learning how to live without erasure. The city forgot them faster than it remembered. That wasn't cruelty, it was function. Cities learned to metabolize disruption the way bodies learn to heal, by sealing wounds quickly even when scars remained underneath. Within weeks, the headlines shifted. New crises replaced old ones. Attention moved on. The absence of spectacle made the ending easier to miss. which was exactly why it mattered. Mara crossed 3 state lines before she stopped long enough to sleep. She didn't mark the distance. She never did. Distance was relative once you stopped measuring your life in places and started measuring it in moments when something shifted. When harm slowed, when truth surfaced, when a person didn't disappear because someone else decided they shouldn't. She slept in her car that night. Windows cracked, engine cold, the world reduced to breath and stillness. No dreams came. That, more than anything, told her she'd done what she came to do. Elena Cross learned how to be anonymous. Not all at once, not gracefully. It came in increments. The first day no one recognized her at the coffee shop. The second day her phone stayed silent until noon. The third day she realized she could walk into a building and leave without anyone logging the time. It was disorienting. Then it was liberating. She volunteered at a legal clinic under a different title, helping people navigate systems she'd once represented. She listened more than she spoke. She didn't offer conclusions unless asked. She learned how much space existed between authority and usefulness. She learned how much of her identity had been borrowed. The ledger didn't disappear. It became something else. Portions of it were absorbed into oversight frameworks, redacted and anonymized, transformed into policy language that could be cited without naming its origin. Other portions circulated quietly among journalists, advocates, and lawyers who understood how systems hid harm behind complexity. No one credited Mara. No one needed to. Truth didn't require attribution to persist. It required repetition. Lena wrote once, not to thank, not to report. Just to say she'd found work at a community center, that she'd changed her hair, that she'd learned how to sleep with the lights off. Mara read the message once and deleted it, not from disinterest, but from respect. Some stories weren't meant to be archived. They were meant to be lived. Elena stood on the same bridge again weeks later. This time, she didn't stop. She crossed it. That distinction mattered more than she expected. She'd once believed endings were the goal. Cases closed, files sealed, narratives concluded. Now she understood that endings were conveniences. They made systems manageable. Life wasn't manageable. It was ongoing. Somewhere else, a small facility reopened under new oversight. Different staff, different protocols, different language. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't mitigation. That was enough. Mara saw the notice posted online and nodded to herself as she passed through a rest stop she wouldn't remember tomorrow. Good, she thought. Not perfect, but better. The unspoken bond between them didn't require maintenance. They didn't check in. They didn't debrief. They didn't relive what had happened. That was how you preserve something fragile without turning it into dependency. Still, on certain days, they thought of each other. Mara did when she noticed a pattern others missed. Elena did when she caught herself about to close a question too quickly. They didn't name it. Naming made things static. This needed to stay alive. Months later, Elena received a call from a city she'd never worked in. A lawyer, careful, respectful. "We're seeing something," he said. "A pattern. It reminds us of a case you were involved in years ago." Elena listened. She asked questions. She didn't offer certainty. When the call ended, she sat quietly for a long time, then reached for a notebook she'd begun carrying again. Not for cases, but for thresholds. Moments when something felt familiar in the wrong way. She wrote a single line, looked twice, then she closed the notebook. Mara felt it too. Not as a call, not as information, as pressure. A place where silence was too organized. A set of decisions that leaned too neatly toward disappearance. A familiar discomfort that settled behind her ribs and refused to leave. She didn't turn the car around immediately. She waited a day, then another. When the feeling didn't fade, she smiled to herself and took the next exit. Some habits were instincts. Some instincts were responsibilities. Elena never called Mara. She didn't need to. Instead, she did what she'd promised without promising it. She noticed. She documented. She spoke when silence was requested. She understood now that prevention rarely looked heroic. It looked like persistence. Mara stopped at a diner she'd never been to before, ordered coffee she didn't want, and watched people pass through their ordinary lives. laughing, arguing, planning futures they assumed would remain intact. She hoped they were right. She also knew hope wasn't a strategy. Awareness was. The system adjusted. It always did. New language replaced old. New frameworks promised safety without addressing power. Old mistakes were relabeled as anomalies. Mara didn't expect perfection. She expected recurrence. That was why she stayed mobile. That was why Elena stayed observant. Between them existed a relay, uncoordinated but continuous. One moved, one watched. Neither waited for permission. The last message came a year later. No name, no explanation. Just a single line, delivered through a channel that hadn't existed the last time they'd spoken. If this happens again, I'll see it. Elena read it once. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. She placed the phone face down on the table and returned to the work in front of her. Across the country, Mara felt her phone vibrate, glanced at the screen, and exhaled slowly. Good, she thought. The story didn't end with resolution. It ended with continuity. With two women who no longer needed the system's approval to act. With people who had been seen, returned, remembered. With structures that would never be pure, but were now watched by those who understood how easily purity became an excuse. Some bonds weren't forged in loyalty. They were forged in refusal. Refusal to erase. Refusal to forget. Refusal to accept silence as safety. The city carried on. So did they. And somewhere, in the space between disappearance and attention, the work continued. Quietly, persistently, without needing to be named. What you've heard tonight isn't a story about winning. It's about interruption. About what happens when disappearance is challenged. When patterns are noticed, and when truth survives without needing permission. Mara kept moving. Elena chose to see. Others were remembered, because someone refused to forget them. The system adjusted. It always does. But somewhere, someone is watching more closely now. And somewhere else, someone is already walking toward the next unanswered question. This has been Midnight Casefiles. Good night. And remember, the most dangerous stories are the ones that almost vanish.